Austin, Texas is a city of infinite possibilities. It has music and art and the freedom to be whoever you choose to be. What better place for 21-year-old Julie Gonzalez to try to make her dreams come true? But one sunny spring morning, Julie neglects to pick up her baby girl Layla from her mother-in-law's house. Her sister Samantha immediately feels that something is off.
Julie and I have always been really close growing up. She is 7.5 years older than me, so she was always looking out for me. My name is Samantha Petrie, and Julie Ann Gonzalez was my older sister. On that day, she hadn't texted me, she hadn't called me.
Julie is from a tight-knit family and is always in touch with her sister, her mom, Sandra, and her Aunt Dora.
My name is Dora Soto, and I am Julie Gonzalez's aunt. Friday was Julie's day off, and she would call me Friday mornings. She would tell me, man, Dora, I'm gonna go do this, or I'm gonna go do that. What do you want to do for lunch? You know, I'm free. That was our Friday. When she didn't call me, I thought, it's kind of weird. After lunchtime, that's when I called Sandra.
My name is Sandra Soto, and I'm Julie Ann's mother. I'm waiting for a phone call from Julie, but she never called me. I started to worry a Friday evening, and I asked Samantha to call her.
I wasn't getting any answer from her phone. When I looked on her MySpace account, all I saw were these posts.
The posts don't sound like the Julie they know and love.
I read that and I was thinking, that's really weird. But it wasn't until I read the next one. We didn't know what was happening. But I knew something was wrong.
Julie grew up in a big Tejano family living in the hill country, 45 minutes outside Austin. Life centers around the family general store and roadside bar.
I was 18 when I had Julie. Her father and I didn't have a relationship. When Julie was born, I was in love. I love being a single mom.
She was our first granddaughter. She spent a lot of time with me and my wife. You love your sons and daughters, but when it's in regards to grandchildren, that's a different kind of love.
Julie has bigger dreams than working in the family business. She wants to be a journalist. And when she's 16, she moves to the big city of Austin to make her dreams come true. She lives with her Aunt Dora and right off the bat meets a guy, George, and spends more time passing love notes than she does writing for the school newspaper. Her best friend Natasha isn't impressed.
Julie told me when she met George, she met some guy. She really likes him. He's really sweet. And then I met him, and I'm like, I could throw you into next week. My name is Natasha Navarro, and I'm one of Julie's friends.
Julie's cousin Michael is also surprised by Julie's new love. George isn't your typical Prince Charming type.
I just remember seeing him and just being like, this dude's a nerd. Like, what are we doing here? My name is Michael Soto. Julie was my cousin, basically like my sister. We were always with each other.
Things move fast. Within 2 years, Julie is married and pregnant. But by the time their baby Layla is walking, the marriage falls apart, leaving Julie a single mom, wondering if her fairy tale ending will ever happen.
So take me now,
While Julie dreams of finding her real prince, her family can't imagine her leaving her daughter behind. 24 hours after she goes missing, Julie's MySpace posts have stopped, and her family still can't reach her by phone or text. That's when her friend Natasha tries calling.
And it rang and nobody answered. So that right there was kind of like suspicious to me, because Julie always answered my calls. But I got a text message like immediately after. And it was like, hey, what's up? And I tried calling again and she didn't answer. And it was like, hey, I really don't feel like talking on the phone right now. Like, what's up? And I said, no, I need you to call me. I have some really good news. This is like something crazy is going on. Like, call me. Because I want to talk to you. And so I called again and she didn't answer. Then I'm like, what the fuck is going on? James, like, to Colorado. Like, she's never even been to Colorado. Like, she didn't travel. She didn't do much. What the fuck is in Colorado?
Has Julie been abducted? Or has her fairy tale dream taken over her senses, making her run off with James in search of true love? Julie's Aunt Dora finally breaks down and calls the police.
Austin 911, do you need police, fire, or EMS?
Police.
This is the police?
Missing persons report.
You want to file a missing persons report?
Yes, ma'am.
A responding officer follows up and does what anyone would do. They look at Julie's social media. What they see makes them think that Julie is just another runaway mom. But they still send an officer to speak to Julie's family.
The police were questioning us, asking us, why do you think Julie would leave? I don't know, she has a kid, she has a job, she has a family here. We don't think that she left, we think something's wrong.
"40 hours after Julie goes missing, Dora takes matters into her own hands.
I skipped out on work and I went to drive her route that she would take to work. I was just looking in the streets for her. I went to her job, to the Walgreens that she worked at. They didn't know anything. I was driving back home, and there's a Walgreens near my home. I looked over, and her car is in the parking lot. And so I pulled in there real fast, and I got out. I had her picture with me, and I showed it to the cashier, and I asked him, I said, have you seen this girl? He says, you know, she looks a little familiar, but I couldn't tell you for sure. I said, well, whose car is sitting out there? Did anybody tell you about that car? He said, they told me that it broke down and they were coming back. So I went to the car and I called Sandra. And I said, Sandra, I found her car.
They found her car. But where is Julie? Has her fairy tale dream turned into a nightmare? Romantic at heart, Julie Gonzalez has been missing for almost 48 hours. Her MySpace posts say she's fallen for a new guy and is spending the weekend with him. But her family thinks it's totally out of character.
I thought this was not my sister, and that something bad had happened.
When Julie's family finds her car abandoned in a Walgreens parking lot, they immediately call the police to come investigate.
Okay, we got the Walgreens up here on the left.
I'm John Brooks. I was a patrol officer with the Austin Police Department in 2010 when I was dispatched to speak with a family regarding a missing person.
So when I walk up to Sandra and Dora, they asked me to open the car
and look inside, but I can't do that. I can't just go inside a car because somebody wants me to. I have to have more. We get calls like this all the time where somebody is looking for somebody they can't find, and there's usually a pretty good explanation for it.
But Julie's aunt and mom are desperate for answers.
Sandra spoke to Detective Brooks. She told him, "We're suspicious. Her ex-husband, George, lives 2-3 blocks from here. He still has the baby. We want to know what's going on."
The family knows that George and Julie's love story took a rough turn, but they pray it hasn't turned tragic.
I gotta think of an escape, I gotta think of a plan.
1 year before Julie disappears, after she has baby Layla, she makes the difficult decision to set her dreams of becoming a journalist aside in order to support the family.
George stopped working, so he was now in charge of taking care of Layla while Julie worked for Walgreens. That's when things drastically changed.
When Julie comes home from work, the house isn't cleaned. The baby stuff is everywhere. Layla hasn't, her diaper hasn't been changed in hours.
There'd be times when I'd come over, and guess who's playing video games? George.
In October of 2009, after 7 months of feeling neglected, juggling her job and the baby, Julie decides it's just not going to work and moves back home to her grandparents' place with Layla.
I know I can't find a way out.
Julie has been missing now for 50 hours. Officer Brooks hears the family's suspicions about her ex-husband, but he also thinks they could be overreacting.
If something bad had happened to Julie and George was involved, it seems kind of reckless that he would park her car so close to his house.
Officer Brooks is not a detective, but he agrees to make the short drive over to George's house to put their minds at ease.
I asked George if we could come in and look around.
George tells Officer Brooks the same story he told the family. The last time he saw Julie was at the custody exchange on Friday morning. He says she asked him to take the baby for the weekend.
George de la Cruz informed Officer Brooks that Julianne showed up to his front door and indicated that she needed some time away from her life and that she was having some difficulties.
Julie would never turn to him for help or assistance. They weren't even getting along.
Officer Brooks looks around the house for any sign of Julie.
I'm looking for anything obvious, blood, obvious bloody weapon, signs of a disturbance. And surely enough, I did not find anything.
Satisfied that Julie isn't here and the baby looks fine, Officer Brooks is just about to leave when something catches his eye.
While we're searching the house, you can see in the backyard, there was a wooden shed on the right. And when we opened the door, there was actually room to walk in.
18, Roger.
And there was a section of the wood flooring had been cut out. There was fresh sawdust. It was about a 4x4 foot section of flooring that was loose. So we lifted that floorboard up, and lo and behold, a trench 4 feet long and about 2 feet deep. It literally looked like a shallow grave underneath the shed.
Are the family's suspicions right? Did George kill Julie and try to bury her in his backyard shed?
So when I asked George what it was, he said that somebody had tried to dig a trench to put plumbing in to turn that shed into a residence. At this point, I've done all that I can do, and the detectives are going to have to be the ones to follow up.
My name is Rogelio Sanchez, and I was the lead detective assigned to the Julie Gonzalez case. We didn't have any solid evidence that anything bad had happened to Julie. What they did have was texts saying that she had voluntarily left.
Days go by and there's still no sign of Julie. No more posts and no more texts.
We're reaching out to APD, begging them to help us because her estranged husband, George, why isn't he being questioned?
Detectives can't help but wonder if the family just doesn't like George and that no one could be good enough for someone as special as their Julie.
George didn't have any kind of extensive criminal history. There weren't any domestic issues that would have suggested that George was capable of doing anything serious to her.
But as the last person to have seen Julie, George may have information on the man who was clearly implicated from the start, the mysterious James.
So on April 6th, George De La Cruz was brought to the police station and interviewed by Detective Scott.
What were the circumstances of y'all's breakup? What occurred?
That she really didn't explain me. She just said that she fell out of love. That's the only explanation she gave me.
Was she seeing anybody else?
I never saw that, and there was no hints whatsoever.
But George is wrong. Police discover through Julie's family that there is another man. Not this mysterious James, but someone who recently came back into her life. Their story began 4 years before she even met George.
Maybe we could roll up. Maybe never grow up.
When Julie was working at the taqueria, she started to see a boy named Aaron. And he was in his 20s, and Julie was still a teenager.
My mother was concerned that Aaron might take Julie's attention away from school.
I was totally against it. I was like, this dude's old. Like, what are you doing talking to an old guy? We're fucking kids.
I told them, no, it can't happen. You and Julie just cannot date.
The Soto family fires Aaron, and Julie's first true love drifts away. But Julie's love story won't be erased so easily.
Someone pour me a drink right now.
4 years later, Aaron is back in her life after a chance meeting at a grocery store. And it's right around the time that Julie moves out of George's house.
She comes out and she's excited, but quiet about it. What got into you, Julie? She said, I just saw Aaron. And my head whipped around so fast. What?
When Julie ran into Aaron again, she called me being like super excited. So I'm just like, okay, but you're in the middle of a divorce.
The investigators discover that Julie spends the night at Aaron's right before she goes missing. They bring him in for questioning.
Let's go back to the last time that you actually physically had eyes on her.
Okay. And we woke up Friday morning. I was like, okay, I love you. Have a good day. I'll talk to you later. Just like every other morning I left to go to work.
But a few hours after they kiss goodbye for the day, Julie sends a text.
Aaron got some text from Julie's phone during the time that he was at work. And I want to say this was probably before lunchtime.
It absolutely blindsided me. She was saying she was breaking up with me, and the responses that I were getting back were really cold. I sent several texts like, like what the F is going on? And she finally texted me back. And I texted her back. It's hard to remember all this because I deleted them so long ago.
Officers asked to see the text messages on Aaron's phone, and Aaron, he said he deleted those text messages.
So certainly that was a big red flag there.
Investigators wonder if Aaron found out that Julie was seeing James, killed her in a fit of jealous rage, and then went back to hide his tracks.
Aaron was genuine when I met him. He was very respectful. He was very nice. Who's to say, what does a murderer look like? What does a rapist look like? You never know what anyone is freaking capable of.
Julie Gonzalez has spent her life expressing herself through writing. But after 4 weeks of silence, her family fears they will never hear from her again.
Every single day, Layla would ask for her mom. That broke my heart.
All police have are social media posts and text messages that paint the picture of a hopeless romantic whose life is on the rocks. All evidence suggests she's run off with a guy named James.
It's plausible that Julie may have met somebody that swept her off her feet, despite her relationship with Aaron, and it could have been something spontaneous.
Julie's family is suspicious of her ex-husband, George, but police have pivoted to an even more compelling suspect, her current boyfriend, Aaron.
I didn't think that he was a bad person. I just didn't like him for Julie.
Suspicious texts, all deleted, and a sudden breakup? This could hold the key to a potential motive. Jealous rage over a new man in Julie's life. But suspicion and theories are not enough, and the investigation goes nowhere. Sandra's sister, Margarita, is done sitting around doing nothing.
My name is Margarita Soto, and I'm Julianne Gonzalez's aunt. When we realized that the cops weren't really searching for her, that's when I came up with the idea that, okay, I'm going to get a hold of all these news stations and let them know there's a missing mom, that we need to find her, we need to blast her face out.
Austin mother vanishes with no explanation.
Hoping that she'll contact one of us, hoping she'll stop by, hoping someone hears something.
We had tip lines set up.
Family members and the father of her child are now pleading for her to come home.
We had private detectives searching the streets of Austin.
I want to see my daughter. I want to know where my daughter is. That's my little girl. You need to find her. We first got the attention of local media and then national media.
The media blitz helps get Julie's face out there, but it doesn't bring Julie home. 1 more week passes. No word, no peace. Just when the family is about to give up hope, Aaron comes forward with a piece of evidence that corroborates what the family has been saying all along. An old-fashioned love letter in Julie's own handwriting.
Aaron eventually turned over a note that Julie had written him, obviously before she left that morning, talking about how much she loved him and how she couldn't wait to get married and have children. That's not a relationship that Julie just would have abandoned all of a sudden.
With no trace of James, and this new profession of love for Aaron, the family is even more convinced that George knows more than he's letting on.
I knew that George was hiding something. We didn't know what, but he was hiding something.
5 weeks after Julie goes missing, an unexpected phone call provides a new opportunity. A chance to pressure George into admitting what he knows.
The Dr. Phil show called me and asked me, how can we help you? We want to help you. How can we help you? I told them, get George to take a polygraph test.
I just wanted to go to Dr. Phil to just confront George. I just wanted to stare at his face because he was avoiding us.
Now, on a popular talk show seen around the world, the Sotos will discover the truth.
I'm going to tell you what the results are right now.
And I looked at him and I said, you're full of shit. I told him, you're a motherfucking liar.
On May 7th, after 43 days living in agony, Julie's family comes face to face with George and his mother Victoria on Dr. Phil. They're hoping a polygraph test will expose him in front of the entire country. But will it?
I'm going to tell you what the results are. He was asked, "Are you responsible for Julie's disappearance?" He answered no. Those were not truthful answers. He failed the polygraph test.
We knew it.
This was not a close call.
This was not a close call at all.
For Julie's family, the results are vindication. But George's mom, Victoria, is furious with her son.
What you did?
I didn't do nothing. I didn't do it. I just felt that I should have stopped her.
Where is she?
I don't know.
Tell me the truth, Georgie.
I don't know, Mommy. I don't know.
Shaken by the polygraph results, George's mother scours her house for signs of her daughter-in-law. She finds nothing. Then she remembers seeing George in the shed around the time Julie disappeared.
She went to the shed, opened up the door, and began to dig. And when she began to panic and began to hyperventilate, she called the Austin Police Department.
Victoria has discovered the suspicious trench under the floorboards that Officer Brooks inspected 6 weeks earlier, yet no one followed up on.
This Detective Scott.
I'm sorry to bother you, please, but could you please come to my house? I just want to talk to you, please.
Okay, you need somebody there at your house to talk to you right now?
Yes. In the back of my yard, I have a storage. And I find a very, very big hole.
She was pretty distraught about it because she said it wasn't there when her husband built the house before they got divorced. She was just afraid that George may have been involved and something may have happened.
I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm saying. Oh, but I need somebody here in my house.
That call from George's mom spurs on the Austin police like nothing else has in this case. That hole should have been inspected properly weeks ago.
Detectives arrived here this morning. Now, this is the home of Julian Gonzalez's estranged husband.
50 days after Julie vanishes, detectives move the case from the Missing Persons Division to homicide.
I was there along with our forensics team and other detectives. George answered the door and we went to work.
They were able to go inside of George's home and inside the shed. The trench was 5 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 1.5 feet deep. Julianne was about 5 feet tall.
The forensics team takes soil samples looking for signs of human remains and sends them to the lab. But the trench isn't the only thing they find. In the house, they discover some receipts.
What we did find was evidence of one of the financial transactions of some items that were purchased at a Walmart using her debit card.
Julie's text to Natasha says she went to Colorado that day with a guy named James. If that's true, why was her bank card being used in a South Austin Walmart?
Detectives went to the Walmart to track down surveillance video. What they did find was George using Julianne's debit card and pushing Layla in a shopping cart, and Julianne was nowhere to be found. Given the fact that George was unemployed, did not have money, detectives had to keep an open mind to the possibility that in order to purchase items for Layla, Julianne left her debit card with George.
The dirt samples come back negative for Julie's DNA, and cadaver dogs let loose on the property find nothing. 2 months after Julie disappears, all investigators have is a handful of social media posts and texts. Detectives strongly suspect George is involved somehow, but they have no proof. Her family can now feel it. She's not ever coming home.
What's your name? And how old are you?
5.
5?
You know how a twin, they lose their other and they feel it.
Get down, Mike, get down.
It's like, that's how I felt. Like I just felt like something was missing.
I told my mom that we had lost Julie.
Detectives hope that Julie's cell phone can help them break the stalemate. But they need an expert to crack the code.
So that summer of 2010, one of our digital forensics detectives that was involved in the case was quickly able to identify that Julie's cell phone had never left Austin.
That means someone else has been pretending to be Julie all along. Just like her family and friends have been insisting this whole time. And James is and always was a big fat lie. But without a body or a crime scene, how will detectives ever prove it?
I mean, this is not your typical case where you have the body and you have a murder weapon and you have witnesses. I mean, we had none of that.
What they do have is a single piece of paper that may hold the key to unlocking the identity of her killer.
Like a restless wanderer through sandy storm sorrow, I see them burning down.
It's been 4 months, and finally, a break in the Julie Gonzalez case. After learning Julie's cell phone never left Austin, detectives are convinced George is involved with her disappearance. But with no proof, they turn to a digital expert to help lead them to the truth.
My name is Jim Cook. I'm a digital forensics expert, and I work with various law enforcement agencies throughout the United States. In today's environment, it's not just about DNA. It's about the digital footprint we leave behind. So one of the first things that we did is we got the call detail records related to Julie's device. And what we found is that on the day that Julie went missing, her device is at the Walmart. And George is on video at the Walmart. And George is using Julie's credit card at the Walmart. And you can see the cellular activity connecting to that antenna that covers that Walmart exactly during that conversation. Therefore, it wasn't Julie trying to pretend to be Julie. It was actually George pretending to be Julie.
Julie's cell phone data corroborated our suspicions already that she never left Austin and that George was our primary focus.
But investigators still need more to make an arrest. They go over all the evidence they found at George's mom's house, and one thing stands out.
George was an excessive gamer, oftentimes gaming up to 18 hours a day. The day that Julie goes missing, he has over 20 hours between gaming sessions, which did not occur on any other day for the records we reviewed.
20 hours without an Xbox fix? For George, that's really weird.
After Julie goes missing, George takes his Xbox and goes to North Austin to his friend's apartment, where they hack into the Wi-Fi of the neighbor across the hall so they can actually play their video game. But at the same time, Julie's phone connects to a tower covering the vicinity of that apartment complex. Julie's device and George's Xbox are in North Austin at the exact same time.
It takes 2 years for detectives to gather enough digital evidence to arrest George for the murder of Julie Gonzalez.
Whenever we take a case to trial, we know that we have one shot to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Without a body, it was going to be an uphill battle.
It took a toll on a lot of us. The holidays were very hard. Julie was the glue around the holidays. She is what kept us together. It wasn't the same without her.
2 years later, the prosecution is finally ready for trial. But circumstantial evidence doesn't sway the hearts of jurors. It's Julie's own words to Aaron, written on the morning she disappeared, that shine through the fog of doubt and help catch her killer.
I still can't believe how lucky I am to be with you.
I'm really glad I got to spend the last couple days with you. Since you're still asleep, that gives me a chance to write your letter. I'm happy to say that you make me feel beautiful, and no one's ever been able to make me feel that way before. I believe we do have a great love. August will be here in no time. I'm so happy that it's so close. Then we will be together. Okay, mi amor. I really gotta get ready for work now. So, I love you. Always and forever. Love, Julie.
We, the jury, find the defendant, George De La Cruz, guilty of the offense of murder.
6 years after Julie went missing, George is sentenced to life in prison for her murder. To this day, Julie's body has never been found. Layla is now a teenager. She was raised by George's mom, and she has only recently started taking calls from her mom's family. As far as she's concerned, the Sotos put her dad behind bars, and she will never forgive them for that.
There's no peace in my family. He's robbed Layla of a mom, of having a normal life. We deserve to know where Julie is. We all do. We need to put her body to rest.
I want Layla to know that her mom was great. And that Julie would do anything in her power to make sure Layla is loved, taken care of. I just wish Layla would know that.
George's mother, I hope she listens to what I'm going to say. That Layla is the key to find out what happened to Julie. When Layla gets old enough, I would love for her to say, "What did you do to my mom? Where is she? Tell me what you did to her." I'm sorry. Please.
The Pacific Ocean is an expanse so vast and profound that it defies human comprehension, serving as both a majestic wonder and a terrifying void. Stretching across the globe, it is a realm where the ordinary rules of terrestrial life simply cease to exist, replaced by the ancient, indifferent rhythms of wind, tide, and current. For centuries, sailors, explorers, and wanderers have been drawn to its infinite horizons, seeking an ultimate sense of freedom that can only be found far away from the rigid structures, borders, and watchful eyes of mainland civilization. To cast off the mooring lines and sail into the deep blue is to enter a world of profound isolation, where a vessel becomes a solitary universe floating over thousands of feet of dark, unfathomable water. This isolation is frequently romanticized in cultural narratives as a peaceful, idyllic escape from the pressures of modern society. However, there is a distinctly terrifying duality to this remoteness. When the enclosed space of a boat transforms from a sanctuary of travel into a crucible of violence, that very same isolation becomes a deadly trap. In the middle of the ocean, there is no one to hear a desperate plea for help. There are no neighbors to intervene, no passing patrols to flag down, and absolutely nowhere to run. The boundary between safety and utter vulnerability is reduced to the thin fiberglass hull of a yacht. It is within this stark and unforgiving environment that the tragic and chaotic events of 2016 unfolded. It is a story that exposes the darkest edges of human behavior, set against the backdrop of one of the most beautiful and isolated regions on the planet, reminding us that true terror does not always lurk in dark alleys, but can sometimes reside in the sunlit, open spaces of a tropical paradise. In the heart of the South Pacific lies the Kingdom of Tonga, a sovereign Polynesian archipelago consisting of over 170 islands scattered across the shimmering blue water. Within this island nation, the Vavayu Group stands out as a world-renowned destination for international cruisers and yachting enthusiasts. Vavayu is widely celebrated as a pristine maritime haven, characterized by its labyrinth of lush, green islands, sheltered anchorages, and crystal-clear waters that teem with vibrant marine life. For those navigating the globe, dropping anchor in Vavayu is often considered the pinnacle of the cruising lifestyle, offering a peaceful respite from the grueling realities of long-distance ocean passages. The calm, protected bays provide a profound sense of security against the unpredictable wrath of the open sea. Travelers arrive here to swim in the warm waters, observe the migrating whales, and experience the tranquil, unhurried pace of island life. Yet, the serene beauty of a geographical location is entirely passive. It cannot influence or mitigate the actions of the people who enter it. The breathtaking scenery of Vavayu provided a sharply contrasting backdrop to a profoundly grim and brutal human tragedy. The placid waters of the anchorage were completely indifferent to the terror that occurred on their surface. The striking visual perfection of the Tongan landscape serves only to amplify the horrifying nature of the crime that shattered the peaceful illusion of this tropical refuge, proving that a picturesque environment offers absolutely no protection against the darkness that can manifest within an interpersonal relationship. Moored within this seemingly idyllic setting was a cruising yacht bearing the name Sea Oak. The name itself suggests a profound sense of strength, resilience, and rooted stability, qualities that one desires in a vessel tasked with surviving the unforgiving forces of the open ocean. A yacht like the Sea Oak is meant to be a floating home, a self-sustaining haven designed to carry its passengers safely across vast stretches of the earth. When individuals commit to living aboard such a vessel, they place their absolute trust not only in the engineering of the boat, but also in the person sharing that confined, isolated space with them. At the absolute center of this narrative is an American woman named Patricia Lynn Kearney. Her presence on the Sea Oak in the remote waters of Tonga represented a journey far from her home country, a life spent navigating the vastness of the world. It is of the utmost importance to anchor this story not in the sensationalism of the ensuing manhunt, but in the profound and irreversible tragedy of her death. Patricia Lynn Kearney was brutally assaulted and lost her life within the very space that was supposed to be her sanctuary. She was discovered deceased aboard the Sea Oak, while the vessel was anchored in what should have been the safe harbor of Vavayu. The discovery of her battered body instantly transformed the recreational yacht into a grim crime scene, a floating tomb containing the physical evidence of an extreme and fatal act of violence. Her death is the dark gravity that pulls the rest of this complex narrative together, a stark reminder of a life violently extinguished in a place where she was fundamentally cut off from any hope of immediate rescue. The individual responsible for inflicting this fatal violence upon Patricia Lynn Kearney was her own husband, Dean J. Fletcher. Another American citizen traversing the South Pacific, Fletcher became the immediate focus of a severe criminal investigation following the discovery of his wife's remains. The local Tongan authorities, confronted with a brutal homicide within their territorial waters, moved swiftly to apprehend him. Fletcher was arrested by the local police force and placed into custody at a detention facility in Vavayu. At this initial stage, the trajectory of the justice process appeared to be relatively straightforward and localized. A heinous crime had been discovered, the primary suspect had been successfully detained, and the mechanisms of the Tongan legal system were ostensibly in motion to hold him accountable. However, the reality of maintaining rigorous security protocols within a remote, relaxed island community soon revealed catastrophic vulnerabilities. The infrastructure and operational procedures of the local holding facility proved completely inadequate when tested by a desperate individual wholly committed to evading the consequences of his actions. In a sequence of events that would shock the international community and deeply embarrass the Tongan government, Dean J. Fletcher managed to orchestrate an incredibly audacious escape. This was not a frantic, aimless flight into the dense tropical jungles of the island. Instead, Fletcher executed a calculated and brazen maneuver that highlighted severe lapses in local law enforcement oversight. Utilizing deception to outsmart the guards tasked with monitoring him, he successfully breached the containment of his cell and slipped away from the facility. His objective was clear and incredibly risky. He bypassed the island entirely and made a direct line back to the very scene of his crime. In a display of staggering boldness, Fletcher managed to reach the anchorage, board the Sea Oak, start the vessel's engines, and cast off. He navigated the yacht out of the harbor and fled into the open ocean, executing this daring escape right under the supervision of the very authorities who had just incarcerated him. This successful evasion ignited a firestorm of outrage and disbelief, transforming a local homicide case into a high-stakes, international maritime crisis. Once the Sea Oak cleared the protected reefs of Vavayu and entered the untamed expanse of the Pacific Ocean, the entire paradigm of the situation shifted dramatically. By crossing the invisible threshold into international waters, Dean J. Fletcher ceased to be merely a local fugitive. He became the target of a complex, cross-border pursuit. The Tongan police and naval forces desperately mobilized to track down the fleeing yacht, but the head start Fletcher had gained, combined with the sheer, overwhelming vastness of the ocean, provided him with a massive tactical advantage. The Pacific Ocean, which had previously served as the isolating curtain for his violent crime, now functioned as his primary instrument for escape. Piloting the Sea Oak single-handedly, he embarked on a grueling and perilous journey across more than 300 nautical miles of open, unforgiving sea. To put this into perspective, 300 nautical miles equates to over 550 kilometers of continuous, solitary navigation through an environment that is constantly in motion and inherently hostile to human survival. Undertaking such a voyage while being actively hunted requires a level of desperation and relentless focus that is difficult to comprehend. Fletcher was not merely sailing aimlessly into the void. He was executing a deliberate run toward American territory. His specific destination was Pago Pago, a major port city located in American Samoa. American Samoa exists as an unincorporated territory of the United States, a crucial geopolitical and legal distinction that would soon warp the trajectory of the entire case. Reaching Pago Pago meant surviving the physical toll of the ocean crossing while bearing the immense psychological pressure of a fugitive on the run. The pursuit was a slow, agonizing chase across the blue expanse, a test of endurance between the pursuing Tongan vessels and a man fighting to reach a perceived safe harbor. The culmination of this desperate, high-stakes flight finally materialized as the Sea Oak approached the bustling harbor of Pago Pago. The element of surprise had vanished, and United States Coast Guard, alongside Customs and Border Protection personnel, had been fully alerted to the approaching threat. The arrival of the fugitive yacht was met not with sanctuary, but with an overwhelming, heavily armed response. In a highly tense and suffocating tactical operation within the seaport, American federal authorities surrounded the Sea Oak. The dramatic maritime chase across the Pacific Ocean concluded with Fletcher being cornered, forcibly removed from the vessel, and placed securely into United States federal custody. However, The dramatic apprehension in Pago Pago was merely the closing of one chaotic chapter and the immediate opening of another, even more convoluted legal nightmare. The moment Dean J. Fletcher stepped ashore in American Samoa, he triggered a massive collision of international jurisdictions. The government of Tonga, deeply aggrieved by the murder in their waters and the subsequent embarrassing escape, immediately and forcefully demanded his extradition to face trial for murder under their sovereign laws. Yet, the application of United States federal law in the territory of American Samoa created an impassable diplomatic wall. The United States government harbored profound concerns regarding the structure of the Tongan judicial system and, most critically, the fact that Tonga had not entirely abolished the use of the death penalty. Citing these legal and ethical barriers, the United States categorically refused the extradition request. Furthermore, because both the victim, Patricia Lynn Kearney, and the perpetrator, Dean J. Fletcher, were American citizens, the United States asserted its own sovereign right to exercise jurisdiction over the crime, despite the fact that the murder had occurred entirely within foreign territorial waters. This jurisdictional blockade initiated a deeply frustrating and complex legal odyssey. Fletcher was eventually transported from the remote outpost of American Samoa to the state of Hawaii to face prosecution within the United States federal court system. This legal maneuvering set the stage for a protracted battle over evidence, jurisdiction, and the fundamental nature of accountability. Ultimately, this convoluted path would lead to a deeply controversial resolution, culminating in a plea agreement where Fletcher accepted guilt for the lesser charge of manslaughter, rather than facing a full trial for first-degree murder. But to truly understand the weight of that final judgment, the profound diplomatic friction it caused, and the devastating lack of closure it provided, we must first immerse ourselves in the harrowing reality of the crime itself. We must examine the meticulously tragic sequence of events that left Patricia Lynn Kearney utterly defenseless on the open water, the systematic local failures that permitted a dangerous man to slip back out to sea, and the chilling realization that on the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific Ocean, justice is often as elusive as the horizon itself. To understand the tragedy that befell Patricia Lynn Kearney, one must first understand the intoxicating and often deceptive allure of the cruising lifestyle. For many, the idea of selling one's possessions, leaving the rigid confines of a traditional career, and setting sail across the world's oceans represents the ultimate human achievement of liberty. It is a dream of total autonomy, where the only master is the wind, and the only boundaries are the coastlines of distant, exotic lands. This was the life that Patricia and her husband, Dean J. Fletcher, had chosen for themselves. They were part of a specific subculture of global wanderers known as liveaboards, individuals who trade the stability of land for the rhythmic, sometimes chaotic existence of life on the water. However, the reality of this lifestyle is far more demanding and psychologically taxing than the glossy photographs in sailing magazines suggest. When a couple decides to inhabit a space as confined as a yacht, the vessel becomes much more than a mode of transport. It becomes an intense, high-pressure environment where every character trait, every minor friction, and every simmering resentment is magnified by the lack of physical escape. On a boat, there is no going for a walk to clear one's head. There is no separate room to retreat to when an argument turns sour. The hull of the ship defines the entire world of the relationship, and for Patricia Kearney, that world would eventually become a place of terminal danger. Patricia was a woman who had embraced this adventurous path, leaving behind the familiar comforts of the United States to navigate the vast, blue wilderness of the South Pacific. She was not merely a passenger on the Sea Oak. She was an integral part of the voyage, a partner in a journey that had taken them across thousands of miles of open sea. To those who saw them from the outside, they might have appeared as the quintessential adventurous American couple living out a retirement or a sabbatical that most people only dare to fantasize about. Yet, the tragedy of Patricia's life is that her story has often been overshadowed by the sensational actions of the man who ended it. To honor her memory, it is necessary to recognize the immense courage it takes to live such a life that requires constant vigilance, physical labor, and a profound reliance on one's companion. She was a daughter, a friend, and a citizen who deserved the protection of the law and the sanctity of her home, even when that home was a fiberglass vessel bobbing in a remote harbor half a world away. Her presence in Tonga was meant to be a chapter of exploration and beauty, a time to experience the legendary hospitality of the Polynesian people and the natural wonders of the Vavayu Islands. Instead, her journey ended in an act of domestic brutality that stands in harrowing contrast to the peaceful surroundings she had sought. Dean J. Fletcher, the man who stood at the helm of both the Sea Oak and the violent events of 2016, presented himself to the world as a capable mariner. In the close-knit community of international cruisers, a captain is often afforded a certain level of respect based on the miles they have logged and the seaworthiness of their vessel. Fletcher occupied a position of absolute authority within the micro-universe of the Sea Oak. On the high seas, the captain's word is law, a tradition born of the necessity for quick decision-making in the face of maritime peril. However, this traditional hierarchy can easily be warped into a means of control and intimidation within a domestic setting. Those who knew the couple or observed them in various ports might have seen a captain who is seasoned and confident, but the investigation into Patricia's death would later suggest a far more volatile and dark interior life. Fletcher was a man who, when faced with the ultimate crisis of his own making, would choose to flee rather than face accountability, revealing a character defined by a desperate, selfish survivalism. The image of the rugged, independent sailor that he projected was ultimately shattered by the reality of the battered woman found on his boat, proving that the skills required to navigate an ocean are entirely different from the moral compass required to value a human life. The setting for this unfolding disaster, the Vavayu Island group in the Kingdom of Tonga, is a place of such profound natural beauty that it seems almost surreal. It is a cluster of coral-fringed islands where the water is so clear that the shadows of boats are cast directly onto the sandy bottom many meters below. For the cruising community, Vavayu is a vital hub, a place to restock supplies, repair equipment, and socialize with other sailors who have made the long trek from the Americas or Europe. The atmosphere in the main port of Niuafu is typically one of camaraderie and shared stories of the sea. It is a place where people look out for one another, where the arrival of a new boat is a cause for interest and a friendly wave. The Sea Oak, with its American flag fluttering in the tropical breeze, would have been a common sight in these waters. But beneath this veneer of tropical tranquility, the isolation of the archipelago also meant that help was far away. Tonga is a developing nation with limited resources, and its police force, while dedicated, was not equipped to handle the sophisticated evasive maneuvers of a desperate American sailor with a background in maritime navigation. The very features that make Vavayu a paradise, its remote location, its hundreds of hidden coves, and its distance from major industrial centers, also made it a place where a crime could be committed in relative secrecy and where a fugitive could hope to disappear. The Sea Oak itself was a vessel that bore the marks of a life spent on the move. A yacht of its size is a complex machine requiring constant maintenance and a deep understanding of its systems. For Patricia and Dean, the boat was their kitchen, their bedroom, their navigation center, and their sole means of survival. Every inch of space was utilized, filled with the artifacts of their shared life. Charts of the Pacific, cooking utensils secured against the roll of the sea, and the personal effects that connect a traveler to their past. It was within this cramped, multi-purpose environment that the tensions between the couple began to reach a breaking point. Forensic experts often speak of the intimacy of violence in domestic homicide cases, and there is perhaps no place more intimate or more claustrophobic than a yacht at anchor. The sounds of the water lapping against the hull and the whistling of the wind in the rigging would have provided a constant white noise, potentially muffling the sounds of the struggle that took place. In a traditional neighborhood, a scream might be heard through a wall or an open window, but in a harbor, the distance between moored boats and the sound-dampening effect of the open air can create a terrifying shroud of silence. As the couple neared the end of their time in Tonga in mid-2016, the social fabric of the cruising community continued around them, oblivious to the impending horror. Other sailors were planning their next legs to Fiji or New Zealand, checking weather GRIB files, and trading tips on the best dive spots. Patricia Kearney was living among these people, perhaps sharing a drink at a local waterfront bar or exchanging pleasantries at the market, while harboring a reality that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The contrast between the public face of the sailing life and the private terror Patricia experienced is one of the most haunting aspects of this case. It reminds us that domestic violence does not respect geography or social status. It can exist just as easily on a luxury yacht in the South Pacific as it can in a suburban household. The isolation of the Sea Oak was not just physical, it was social. In the transient world of yachting, people come and go, and it is easy for a person's distress to be overlooked as they move from one port to the next. When the violence finally erupted into a fatal assault, the geographical context of Tonga became a critical factor in the aftermath. The local authorities were faced with a crime that was rare for their peaceful islands. The death of an American tourist is a major event in a country that relies heavily on its reputation as a safe, welcoming destination. The initial discovery of Patricia's body on the Sea Oak sent shockwaves through the local community and the expatriate population. The beauty of the Vavayu sunset was suddenly obscured by the grim reality of a crime scene tape and the presence of investigators on the deck of the yacht. The investigation was not just about finding a killer, it was about seeking justice for a woman who had come to their shores seeking peace and found only brutality. The Kingdom of Tonga, with its deep Christian roots and strong emphasis on family and respect, was shaken to its core by the allegations against Fletcher. The context of this case is also deeply rooted in the legal complexities of being a person without a country while on the move. Though Fletcher and Kearney were American citizens, they were subject to the laws of the Kingdom of Tonga while in its waters. This intersection of nationality and jurisdiction would later become the central theme of the case, but in those first few days after Patricia's death, the focus was purely local. The Tongan police were tasked with securing a vessel that was also a home, preserving evidence in an environment, salt water and humidity, that is notoriously hostile to forensic preservation, and ensuring that the primary suspect did not utilize his primary asset, his ability to sail away. The failure to prevent Fletcher's escape would eventually become a point of international contention, but it began as a failure of local imagination. It was difficult for the guards at the small, under-resourced detention center to conceive that a man would have the audacity, the skill, and the cold-blooded determination to return to the scene of his wife's death and sail a yacht into the dark, vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean alone. Patricia Lynn Kearney's life ended in a place that many would call heaven, but for her, in those final moments, it was undoubtedly a hell of isolation. She was a woman whose journey was cut short by the person she should have been able to trust most in the world. As we move forward into the details of the investigation and the hunt for Dean J. Fletcher, it is her face and her lost potential that must remain at the forefront of the narrative. The Sea Oak was no longer a symbol of strength or a haven of rest. It had become a floating testament to a broken trust and a life stolen. The blue horizons of Tonga, once a source of wonder, now stood as the silent witnesses to a tragedy that would soon ignite a multinational pursuit and a legal battle that would last for years. The stage was set for a confrontation between the law of the land and the lawlessness of a man who believed the ocean could wash away his sins. The violence that claimed the life of Patricia Lynn Kearney did not occur in a vacuum, nor was it a sudden, inexplicable storm that appeared on an otherwise clear horizon. In the world of true crime, we often look for a singular moment of rupture, but in the case of the Sea Oak, the incident was a brutal culmination of forces confined within the narrow walls of a cruising yacht. On that fateful day in July 2016, while the vessel was anchored in the pristine and tranquil waters of the Vavayu Island group in Tonga, the sanctuary of the boat was transformed into a site of extreme domestic horror. The physical reality of the assault was devastating. Patricia was subjected to a beating so severe and so sustained that it resulted in her death. This was not a quick or accidental encounter. It was a savage display of force by Dean J. Fletcher against a woman who had nowhere to go. The geography of a yacht means that every blow is struck in a space where the victim is always within reach of their attacker. There are no heavy doors to lock, no hallways to run down, and the water surrounding the hull acts as a secondary wall, pinning the victim inside. When the Tongan authorities were finally alerted to the situation and boarded the Sea Oak, they discovered a scene that stood in gruesome contrast to the holiday atmosphere of the surrounding harbor. The interior of the yacht, which should have been a place of organized maritime life, was instead a testament to a struggle. Patricia Kearney was found deceased, her body bearing the unmistakable signs of a violent struggle and a fatal beating. The shock among the local Tongan officials and the tight-knit community of international sailors was immediate and profound. In a place like Vavayu, where the most common police interventions involve minor thefts or public nuisances, a homicide of this magnitude was unprecedented. Dean J. Fletcher was immediately identified as the sole suspect. There was no one else on the boat, no evidence of an outside intruder, and no plausible explanation for the catastrophic injuries Patricia had sustained other than a direct assault by the man who shared her life and her cabin. Fletcher was taken into custody by the Tongan police and transported to the police station in Niafu, the main administrative center of Vavayu. At this point, the legal machinery of the Kingdom of Tonga began to grind into motion. Fletcher was charged with murder, and given the gravity of the crime, he was placed in a holding cell to await further legal proceedings. The detention facility in Niafu was never designed to hold a high-stakes international fugitive or a man facing the potential of a life sentence or the death penalty. It was a modest structure, reflecting the generally peaceful nature of the islands. For a few days, it seemed that the situation was under control. Fletcher was behind bars, the Sea Oak was secured as a crime scene, and the investigation into the specific timeline of the murder was underway. However, the authorities significantly underestimated the desperation of the man they had in their charge. Fletcher was not a typical local offender. He was a man with a deep understanding of the sea and a realization that his life as he knew it was over unless he could find a way back to the water. The escape of Dean J. Fletcher from Tongan custody is a sequence of events that continues to haunt the reputation of the local law enforcement agencies. On the morning of September 29, 2016, Fletcher managed to orchestrate a plan that was as simple as it was effective. Utilizing the relatively relaxed atmosphere of the Tongan jail, he managed to deceive the guards on duty. While the exact mechanics of the deception have been the subject of much scrutiny, the result was that Fletcher was able to slip out of his cell and exit the police station unnoticed. He did not flee into the dense interior of the island where he would eventually be hunted down by search parties. Instead, he made a calculated and direct move toward the one place where he felt he had a tactical advantage, the harbor. He moved through the streets of Niafu with the focus of a man who knew exactly where his salvation lay. He reached the waterfront, and despite being a wanted man in a small town where news travels fast, he managed to board the Sea Oak. The audacity of what followed is almost difficult to believe. The Sea Oak, the very site of the murder, was still sitting in the harbor. Fletcher boarded the vessel, and in a display of cold-blooded technical proficiency, he prepared the boat for an immediate departure. He started the engines, the low thrum of the diesel motor signaling his intent to the quiet harbor. He began the process of hauling up the anchor, a task that requires time and creates a distinct mechanical noise. Yet, despite the presence of police and the proximity of other vessels, he was successful. He cast off his lines and began to navigate the Sea Oak out through the narrow, reef-fringed channels of the Vavayu group. By the time the Tongan authorities realized that their prisoner was not in his cell and had returned to his yacht, the Sea Oak was already moving toward the open ocean. The pursuit was on, but Fletcher had gained the one thing a sailor needs most, a head start. The Tongan police and naval forces scrambled to react. They deployed a search and rescue boat, the Voe Niafu, to intercept the fleeing yacht. What followed was a high-stakes maritime chase that spanned the boundary between territorial and international waters. As the Sea Oak cleared the protection of the islands and hit the swells of the open Pacific, the physical conditions of the pursuit became much more grueling. Fletcher was operating the yacht alone, a task that is difficult under normal circumstances and nearly impossible under the stress of a chase. He had to manage the sails, the engine, and the navigation while constantly monitoring the horizon for his pursuers. The Tongan authorities eventually caught up with him while he was still within their reach, but the confrontation did not end in an arrest. Fletcher, displaying a level of aggression that matched the crime he was accused of, allegedly threatened the police with a flare gun and other makeshift weapons, refusing to allow them to board. He made it clear that he would not be taken back to Tonga without a fight. The chase continued for hours and then for days as the Sea Oak moved further north. The Tongan vessel, limited by its own fuel capacity and the jurisdictional complexities of the high seas, eventually had to watch as the yacht disappeared toward the horizon. Fletcher was heading for American Samoa, a distance of over 300 nautical miles across the open ocean. This was not a leisure cruise. It was a desperate flight through some of the most isolated waters on the planet. For Fletcher, the Sea Oak was no longer a home or a crime scene. It was a blockade runner. Every mile he put between himself and Tonga was a mile toward a different legal system, one he clearly believed would be more favorable to his situation. The psychological state of a man sailing a boat alone for several days, knowing that his wife's blood had been spilled on the very floorboards beneath his feet, is something that defies easy analysis. He was surrounded by the evidence of his violence, yet his focus remained entirely on the mechanical requirements of the escape. As the Sea Oak surged through the waves, the international community was being alerted to the situation. The Tongan government was in contact with United States authorities, informing them that a wanted murderer was heading toward American territory. The Pacific, which usually feels like a vast, empty space, was suddenly the stage for a very specific and focused hunt. In American Samoa, the United States Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection were preparing for the yacht's arrival. They knew Fletcher was coming, and they knew he was dangerous. The port of Pago Pago is one of the best natural harbors in the South Pacific, but for Dean J. Fletcher, it was becoming a funnel. He had successfully crossed the 300 nautical miles, proving his skill as a mariner, but he was sailing directly into a trap that had been set long before he saw the peaks of Tutuila Island on the horizon. The arrival of the Sea Oak in Pago Pago was the climax of the physical pursuit. As the yacht entered the harbor, it was immediately identified and shadowed by federal vessels. The transition from the lawless freedom of the open ocean to the rigid control of an American port was swift and absolute. The U.S. authorities did not take any chances. They surrounded the yacht with an overwhelming show of force, ensuring that Fletcher had no further room to maneuver. The man who had outsmarted the Tongan guards and defied the Tongan Navy found himself staring down the barrel of American federal law enforcement. When the officers finally boarded the Sea Oak, they found a man who was exhausted and cornered. The dramatic escape, which had begun in a small jail cell in Niuefu and covered hundreds of miles of deep blue water, ended in the oily, calm waters of an industrial port. Fletcher was taken into custody without further violence at that moment, ending the immediate threat he posed to the maritime community. But as he was led away in handcuffs, the focus of the story shifted from the physical act of the escape to the immense tragedy that had started it all. The Sea Oak, now a doubly significant crime scene, was impounded. It sat in the harbor of Pago Pago, a silent witness to a journey that had begun with a murder and ended with a desperate, failed attempt at permanent flight. The incident and the subsequent chase had captured the attention of the world, but the core of the matter remained the same. A woman was dead, and the man responsible was now in a position where he could no longer run from the consequences. The physical walls of the American Detention Center were much stronger than those in Tonga, but the legal walls that were about to be built around him would prove to be even more complex and difficult to navigate. The incident was over, but the reckoning was only just beginning, and it would involve a diplomatic and legal battle that would challenge the very definitions of international justice. With the Sea Oak finally secured in the heavy industrial heat of Pago Pago, the investigation into the death of Patricia Lynn Kearney transitioned from a frantic physical pursuit into a meticulous, multi-layered forensic and legal autopsy. To understand the gravity of what the investigators were facing, one must first look at the state of the yacht when it was finally boarded by United States federal agents. A vessel that has been used as both a murder scene and a high-speed getaway vehicle across hundreds of miles of salt-sprayed ocean is a nightmare for forensic technicians. Salt water is a natural enemy to biological evidence. its corrosive nature capable of breaking down DNA and obscuring the subtle patterns of blood spatter that tell the story of a struggle. Yet, the cabin of the Sea Oak remained a haunting capsule of the violence that had occurred weeks prior in Tonga. When the investigators stepped into the living quarters, they weren't just looking for physical clues. They were looking for the echo of Patricia's final moments. The initial Tongan investigation had been rudimentary, hampered by limited resources and a lack of specialized maritime forensic kits. But once the FBI and the Coast Guard Investigative Service took control of the vessel in American Samoa, the level of scrutiny shifted. They documented the blunt force trauma evidence that contradicted any narrative of a simple accident. The investigation revealed a pattern of sustained physical abuse, a sequence of events that suggested Patricia had been trapped in the confined space of the yacht while Dean J. Fletcher unleashed a level of brutality that was both intimate and catastrophic. The investigative process in the aftermath of the capture in Pago Pago was immediately complicated by a significant procedural twist that would come to define the entire case. While the physical evidence on the boat was being processed, a secondary investigation was launched into how Fletcher had managed to escape Tongan custody in the first place. This was more than just a matter of local embarrassment. It was a critical piece of the puzzle regarding Fletcher's state of mind and his level of premeditation. The investigation into the Tongan jailbreak revealed a staggering series of security lapses that Fletcher had exploited with chilling efficiency. In the small, communal atmosphere of the Niafu police station, the guards had treated Fletcher not as a dangerous suspected murderer, but as a high-status American visitor who happened to be in trouble. This cultural lens of hospitality and trust proved to be a fatal flaw. Investigators discovered that Fletcher had spent his days in custody observing the routines of the guards, identifying the moments when the station was least staffed, and building a rapport with his captors to lower their suspicion. He had used his American captain persona to project an air of compliance, all while he was mentally mapping his route back to the harbor. The twist in the investigation deepened when it was revealed that Fletcher's escape wasn't just a lucky break, it was a calculated maritime operation. When he reached the Sea Oak after slipping out of his cell, he didn't just start the engine and leave. He had prepared the vessel. The investigation of the boat's logs and supplies indicated that he had potentially prepositioned items, or at least had a very clear understanding of his fuel and water reserves. He knew that the Tongan authorities lacked the long-range blue water capabilities to follow him once he cleared the territorial horizon. This realization shifted the investigators' view of Fletcher from a man who committed a crime of passion to a man who possessed a cold, tactical intelligence. He had utilized the very ocean he claimed to love as a weapon against the pursuit of justice. Every mile he sailed toward American Samoa was a deliberate move into a legal gray zone that he seemed to understand better than the people chasing him. The most significant investigative twist, however, was not found on the Sea Oak or in the Tongan jail, but in the fine print of international extradition law. As the United States and Tonga began their dialogue regarding the custody of Dean J. Fletcher, the investigation hit a wall of sovereign conflict. Tonga, rightfully seeking justice for a crime committed on its soil, demanded the return of the prisoner. But the U.S. State Department and Department of Justice investigators began a parallel inquiry into the Tongan judicial system. This was the moment the case transformed from a homicide investigation into a geopolitical standoff. The investigators had to grapple with the fact that Tonga still held the death penalty on its books, even if it hadn't been used in decades. Under U.S. federal law and various international treaties, the United States is often restricted from extraditing individuals to countries where they might face capital punishment or where the judicial process is deemed incompatible with certain constitutional protections. This meant that the more the investigators looked into the Tongan legal framework, the more they realized that Fletcher might never be sent back to the scene of the crime. This created a paradoxical situation for the investigators. They had the suspect, they had the vessel, and they had a mounting pile of forensic evidence, but the venue for justice was suddenly in total flux. The investigation in Hawaii, where Fletcher was eventually moved, had to start from scratch in many ways to build a case that would hold up in a U.S. federal court for a crime committed in foreign waters. This required a level of cooperation between Tongan police and American federal agents that was fraught with tension. The Tongan authorities felt that their sovereignty was being undermined, while the American investigators felt they were bound by the rigid constraints of their own legal system. The twist here was that Fletcher's desperate run to American Samoa had actually worked. By choosing to land on U.S. soil, he had effectively invoked a shield of procedural protections that he never would have had if he had stayed in Tonga or fled to a country with a direct and seamless extradition treaty with the kingdom. While the lawyers argued over jurisdiction, the forensic investigation continued to peel back the layers of the life Patricia and Dean lived aboard the Sea Oak. Investigators began interviewing other members of the cruising community who had encountered the couple in various ports across the Pacific. These interviews provided a psychological profile that served as the backbone of the prosecution's case. The cruiser's grapevine is an incredibly powerful source of information, and the investigation tapped into a wealth of observations. Other sailors recalled instances of Fletcher's volatile temper and his controlling behavior toward Patricia. These weren't just anecdotes. They were pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture of a long-standing pattern of domestic abuse that had been hidden by the isolation of the sea. The investigation was essentially reconstructing a marriage that had turned into a prison. They discovered that Patricia's isolation was not just geographical. It was a deliberate strategy used by Fletcher to keep her away from anyone who might intervene. The technical investigation of the Sea Oak's navigation systems also provided a fascinating and damning timeline. By analyzing the GPS data and the electronic charts, investigators were able to see the exact movements of the vessel leading up to the night of the murder and the precise path Fletcher took during his escape. The data showed a man who was in total control of his vessel, debunking any claims that he was in a state of confused panic. The path he took from Vavayu to Pago Pago was an efficient, expert line through some of the most dangerous waters in the region. This technical evidence was crucial because it demonstrated that Fletcher was functioning at a high level of cognitive ability throughout the entire ordeal. He was navigating by the stars and the digital screen with the same cold precision he used to outmaneuver the Tongan guards. The investigation was proving that every step Fletcher took, from the moment of the assault to the moment he was surrounded in Pago Pago, was part of a singular focus on self-preservation. But perhaps the most chilling detail uncovered during the investigation was the realization of how close Fletcher came to truly disappearing. If he had chosen to sail to a different, even more remote island chain, or if he had scuttled the Sea Oak and tried to blend into a different port under a false identity, the case might never have been resolved. The investigation highlighted the sheer luck involved in his detection by the authorities in American Samoa. It was a reminder of how the vastness of the Pacific can swallow people and secrets whole. The fact that the Sea Oak was spotted and reported was a testament to the vigilance of the maritime community, but the investigation also showed that the international systems for tracking such vessels are surprisingly fragile. The twist, in the end, was that the very expertise that allowed Fletcher to escape, his mastery of the sea, was also what led him into the narrow, inescapable confines of a U.S. federal harbor. As the investigative phase began to wind down and the legal phase took over, the focus returned to the evidence of the crime itself. The FBI's laboratory results on the blood found in the cabin were irrefutable. They matched Patricia's DNA, and the patterns of the stains told a story of a struggle that had moved across the confined space of the yacht. There were signs of attempts to clean the scene, another indicator of Fletcher's calculated response to the violence. The investigation had successfully dismantled any hope Fletcher had of claiming the death was an accident or the result of an outside intruder. However, the final twist was yet to come. Despite the mountain of evidence and the audacity of his escape, the complexities of the law would lead to a conclusion that many, especially the people of Tonga and Patricia's loved ones, would find deeply unsatisfying. The investigation had done its job. It had found the truth of what happened on the Sea Oak. But the truth, as it turned out, would have to navigate through a legal system that was just as turbulent and unpredictable as the ocean Dean J. Fletcher had tried to use as his escape route. The transition from the how of the crime to the why of the sentencing was where the narrative of justice would truly begin to fray. The transition from the wild, salt-sprayed expanse of the South Pacific to the sterile, wood-paneled corridors of a United States federal court is a jarring one. For Dean J. Fletcher, the journey from the deck of the Sea Oak to a courtroom in Honolulu Hawaii, represented more than just a change in geography. It was a shift into a reality where his mastery of the winds and tides mattered far less than the precise interpretation of statutes and treaties. In the eyes of the law, the blue water chase that had captivated the world was merely a preamble to a much more complex and static confrontation. The case of the United States versus Dean J. Fletcher was not just a trial about a domestic homicide. It was a profound test of international relations, jurisdictional boundaries, and the fundamental definition of justice when it is forced to travel across borders. As the legal proceedings began, the vibrant, chaotic energy of the maritime escape was replaced by the slow, methodical, and often frustrating pace of federal litigation. The world watched as a man who had successfully outmaneuvered a nation's navy was brought to heel by the quiet, overwhelming power of a legal system that he had desperately tried to evade, yet ironically, would eventually rely upon for protection against the very country where his crime began. The first and most significant hurdle in the legal process was the fierce diplomatic tug-of-war regarding where Fletcher should actually stand trial. The Kingdom of Tonga was understandably resolute. A woman had been killed within their territorial waters, a crime had been committed on their soil, and a prisoner had escaped their custody in a manner that humiliated their law enforcement. From the Tongan perspective, sovereignty demanded that Fletcher be returned to face the music in Niuefu. They filed a formal and urgent extradition request, expecting the United States to honor the typical protocols of international cooperation. However, this request triggered a deep and systemic conflict within the American legal apparatus. United States officials, while sympathetic to Tonga's position, were bound by their own constitutional and statutory requirements. The primary sticking point was the Tongan judicial system itself, specifically the fact that the kingdom still maintained the death penalty as a legal punishment for murder. Under U.S. policy and several international human rights precedents, the United States is extremely reluctant to extradite individuals to jurisdictions where they might face execution, especially if there are concerns about the procedural safeguards in place. This created a period of intense legal and diplomatic friction that lasted for months. The Tongan government felt that the United States was acting with a sense of neo-colonial superiority, essentially telling a sovereign nation that its laws and courts were not good enough to judge an American citizen. Meanwhile, American federal investigators and prosecutors were busy building a contingency plan. They knew that if the extradition was blocked, which it eventually was by a federal judge in American Samoa and supported by the State Department, they could not simply let Fletcher go free. Because both the victim, Patricia Lynn Kearney, and the defendant, Dean J. Fletcher, were United States citizens, the U.S. possessed what is known as extraterritorial jurisdiction. Under the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States, the federal government has the authority to prosecute crimes committed by or against its citizens on the high seas or in certain foreign settings. This legal mechanism became the vessel that would carry the case forward, but it was a vessel fraught with its own complexities. The trial was eventually moved to Honolulu, Hawaii, the nearest federal district with the resources and facilities to handle such a high-profile international case. When Fletcher appeared in court, he was a far cry from the rugged, defiant sea captain who had brandished a flare gun at Tongan police. Clad in a standard-issue jumpsuit, his movements were restricted by the very walls he had once managed to slip through. The prosecution's task was daunting. To convict Fletcher of first-degree murder in a U.S. court for a crime committed in Tonga, they had to rely heavily on evidence gathered by Tongan officials whose forensic standards and chain of custody procedures were different from those required in the American federal system. There were missing pieces, delays in communication, and the inherent difficulty of bringing witnesses from remote Pacific islands to testify in a skyscraper in downtown Honolulu. The defense, recognizing these vulnerabilities, prepared to chip away at the prosecution's narrative, focusing on the lack of direct eyewitnesses to the assault and questioning the integrity of the initial investigation in Vavayu. Throughout the pretrial hearings, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of Patricia Kearney's absence. While the lawyers argued over the finer points of the Extradition Act and the admissibility of Tongan police reports, the reality of what had happened on the Sea Oak was never far from the surface. The prosecution presented the autopsy findings, which were gruesome and undeniable. Patricia had not died of a single, tragic accident. She had been the victim of a sustained and violent physical trauma. The defense tried to paint a picture of a volatile relationship where both parties were under immense stress, perhaps suggesting a sudden, unplanned escalation rather than a calculated murder. But the prosecution countered with Fletcher's own actions after the death. They argued that his elaborate escape was not the behavior of a grieving, panicked husband, but the calculated maneuvers of a guilty man who knew exactly what he had done and was willing to risk everything to avoid the consequences. The flight as evidence of guilt became a central pillar of the government's case. As the case moved toward a potential trial date, a quiet and controversial negotiation was taking place behind the scenes. Federal prosecutors were weighing the risks of a full-blown murder trial. If they went to trial and lost due to some technicality regarding the Tongan evidence or jurisdictional nuances, Fletcher would walk free entirely. On the other hand, a plea deal would ensure a guaranteed period of incarceration and a formal admission of guilt. For the Tongan authorities, any outcome other than a murder conviction in their own courts felt like a betrayal. But for the American legal team, the priority was securing a definitive end to the saga. In a move that sparked significant debate and disappointment among Patricia's supporters and the Tongan public, the United States Department of Justice reached a plea agreement with Dean J. Fletcher. He agreed to plead guilty to the charge of manslaughter, a significantly lesser offense than the original murder charges he faced in Tonga. The sentencing hearing in Honolulu was the final act of this international drama. It was the moment where the cold calculations of the plea deal met the raw emotional reality of the crime's impact. Family members of Patricia Kearney had the opportunity to speak, their voices filling the courtroom with a grief that no legal statute could fully encapsulate. They spoke of a woman who was adventurous and kind, whose life had been stolen in a place she should have been safe. They expressed the hollow feeling of a justice that felt incomplete, a sentence that seemed too light for the level of brutality Patricia had endured. Fletcher, for his part, made his own statements, but to many in the room, his words felt hollow, the scripted remorse of a man who had already secured his best possible outcome through a series of tactical legal maneuvers. The judge, bound by the sentencing guidelines and the terms of the plea deal, had to find a balance between the severity of the crime and the pragmatic realities of the prosecution. When the sentence was finally handed down, it was a moment of profound anticlimax for those who had followed the case from the beginning. Fletcher was sentenced to a term of imprisonment in a federal facility, but the number of years was far less than what the Tongan government had sought. The reaction in Tonga was one of bitterness and a sense of injustice. To them, the American captain had successfully used his nationality and the complexities of his country's legal system to escape the full weight of the law for a crime he committed on their shores. In the United States, the case was seen by some as a successful exercise of extraterritorial jurisdiction, a way to ensure that an American citizen did not escape punishment simply because they were in a remote corner of the world. But for many others, it was a reminder of how easily the truth can be diluted when it has to pass through the filters of international diplomacy and legal compromise. The legal resolution of the Dean J. Fletcher case left a lingering sense of unease in the Pacific. It highlighted the vast gaps between the legal systems of different nations and the way those gaps can be exploited by the desperate. The Sea Oak, once a vessel of exploration and later a crime scene, was eventually sold or dismantled, its physical presence fading just as the headlines did. But the legal precedents set during the trial remain. The case is now studied by students of international law and maritime jurisdiction, a textbook example of the death penalty obstacle in extradition and the long reach of U.S. federal power. Yet, beyond the law books, the case remains a human tragedy. The trial did not bring Patricia Kearney back, nor did it fully bridge the divide between a small island nation and a global superpower. In the end, the courtroom in Honolulu provided a conclusion, but not necessarily a closure. The gavel fell, the prisoner was led away, and the lawyers packed their briefcases, leaving behind a transcript of a journey that had begun in a sun-drenched harbor and ended in a windowless room of judgment. The trial of Dean J. Fletcher proved that while a man might be able to sail a yacht across hundreds of miles of open ocean to escape a local jail, he could never truly sail away from the reach of a globalized legal system. However, it also proved that the justice that system delivers is often a compromise, a shadow of the absolute accountability that victims and their families so rightly crave. As the Pacific tides continued to wash against the shores of Vavayu and Pago Pago, the story of the Sea Oak became a cautionary tale of how the very laws designed to protect us can sometimes become the instruments that complicate the path to true reckoning. The trial was over, the sentence was served, but the questions of sovereignty, safety, and the true value of a life lost at sea would continue to echo across the water long after the courtroom doors were locked for the night. The echoes of the final gavel in the Honolulu courtroom did not merely signal the end of a trial. They marked the beginning of a long, unsettling silence that would hang over the South Pacific for years to come. When Dean J. Fletcher was led away to begin his sentence for manslaughter, the physical chase was over, but the moral and diplomatic ripples of his actions continued to expand like waves from a stone cast into a still pond. In the Kingdom of Tonga, the resolution of the case was met not with a sense of relief, but with a profound and bitter realization that justice, when viewed through the lens of international politics and differing legal systems, is rarely absolute. For the people of Vavayu, the man they had known as a guest, then a prisoner, and finally a fugitive, had managed to slip through the fingers of their sovereign law one last time. The fact that an American citizen could commit a brutal act on Tongan soil, flee their custody, and then receive a reduced sentence in a distant American court felt like a deep institutional wound. It was a reminder of the inherent power imbalances that exist in a globalized world, where the boundaries of a small nation can be treated as mere suggestions by those with the means and the nationality to transcend them. The diplomatic fallout between Tonga and the United States was perhaps the most tangible consequence of the Sea Oak tragedy. For months, the two nations had been locked in a stalemate that tested the limits of their cooperation. The Tongan government had invested significant pride and resources into the prosecution of Fletcher, viewing it as a matter of national integrity to hold him accountable for the death of Patricia Lynn Kearney. When the United States ultimately refused extradition based on concerns regarding the death penalty and the Tongan judicial structure, it sent a message that resonated far beyond the specifics of the case. It suggested that even in the face of a clear and violent crime, the standards of the First World would always take precedence over the sovereignty of smaller island nations. This created a lingering tension in the region, a sense that the Pacific was not a shared space of equal partners, but a landscape where different rules applied depending on the flag flying from your mast. The Tongan police force, meanwhile, had to face the harsh reality of their own internal failures. The embarrassment of Fletcher's escape led to a quiet but necessary overhaul of security protocols in regional detention centers. The days of treating international yachties with an inherent, unearned trust were over, replaced by a more cynical and guarded approach to maritime law enforcement. Beyond the halls of government, the case of the Sea Oak left a permanent mark on the international cruising community. For those who lived their lives on the water, the story was a chilling deconstruction of the cruiser's dream. The lifestyle is built on a foundation of mutual trust and the belief that the ocean is a sanctuary from the complexities and dangers of land-based society. But the death of Patricia Kearney exposed the dark underbelly of that isolation. It proved that the very thing cruisers seek, remoteness, is also the greatest ally of an abuser. When a boat moves from port to port, it carries its secrets with it, and the transient nature of the community makes it easy for signs of domestic violence to be overlooked or dismissed as the stress of the voyage. The yachting forums and waterfront bars of the Pacific were filled with discussions about the case, as sailors grappled with the realization that one of their own had used his skills to commit a crime and then used those same skills to evade capture. The Sea Oak became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the freedom of the seas is a double-edged sword that can just as easily provide cover for a predator as it can a haven for a dreamer. The legacy of Patricia Lynn Kearney herself is perhaps the most important, yet often the most overlooked, aspect of the aftermath. In the sensationalism of the manhunt and the complexity of the trial, she was frequently reduced to a piece of evidence or a catalyst for a legal debate. But Patricia was a woman who had dared to pursue a life of adventure, a woman whose journey was cut short by the very person who should have been her most steadfast protector. The tragedy of her death is not just in the violence of its end, but in the silence that preceded it. One can only imagine the loneliness she must have felt in those final weeks, anchored in a paradise where the beauty of the surroundings stood in such stark contrast to the terror within her own home. Her story serves as a solemn reminder of the thousands of women who face domestic violence in environments where help is out of reach. To remember Patricia is to acknowledge the vulnerability that exists in even the most idyllic settings and to recognize that no amount of turquoise water or tropical sun can mask the reality of a life lived in fear. She was more than a victim. She was a traveler, a companion, and a citizen whose loss left a void in the lives of those who knew her back in the United States, a void that a manslaughter conviction could never truly fill. The legal precedent set by the Fletcher case continues to be a subject of intense study for experts in maritime and international law. It highlighted the death penalty loophole in extradition treaties, showing how a nation's refusal to abolish capital punishment, even if they do not actively use it, can inadvertently provide a shield for criminals who flee to jurisdictions like the United States. It also demonstrated the incredible reach of extraterritorial jurisdiction, proving that the U.S. government is willing and able to prosecute its citizens for crimes committed halfway across the globe. However, the case also exposed the limitations of that power. The compromise of a plea deal for manslaughter, necessitated by the difficulties of gathering evidence across international lines, remains a controversial outcome. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of justice. Is a guaranteed, shorter sentence in an American prison better than the risk of a failed prosecution in a foreign court? For those who believe in absolute accountability, the answer is a resounding no. For the pragmatists of the legal system, it was the only way to ensure that Dean J. Fletcher did not walk away with no punishment at all. As the years have passed since 2016, the physical traces of the case have largely vanished. The Sea Oak was eventually disposed of, stripped of a name that had become synonymous with murder and flight. The harbor of Vavayu has seen hundreds of other yachts come and go, their crews unaware of the tragedy that once unfolded beneath the same stars. In Pago Pago, the industrial hum of the port continues, indifferent to the dramatic arrest that once brought the world's media to its docks. But for the individuals involved, the Tongan guards who were deceived, the American agents who conducted the raid, and the family members who still mourn a daughter and a friend, the case is never truly closed. It remains a part of their personal history, a story of a journey that went horribly wrong and a pursuit that revealed as much about the flaws in our systems as it did about the flaws in the human heart. The story of Dean J. Fletcher is a stark reminder that the ocean, for all its beauty, is an indifferent witness. It does not judge the actions of those who sail upon it, nor does it keep a record of the blood spilled on its waves. It provides the space for escape, but it also provides the distance that allows crimes to flourish in the dark. The search for justice in the Pacific is a constant struggle against that vastness and that indifference. We build our laws and our treaties like lighthouses, trying to cast a beam of accountability into the shadows, but as the Sea Oak proved, there are always patches of darkness where a determined and desperate person can hide. The true consequence of the case is the realization that we are still learning how to govern the lawless spaces of our world, and that the price of that learning is often paid in human lives. In the final reflection, one is left with the image of the Pacific horizon, a line that seems to offer infinite possibility, but also acts as a boundary that is notoriously difficult to cross in the name of the law. Dean J. Fletcher tried to use that horizon to disappear, to wash away the reality of what he had done to Patricia Kearney. He failed in his ultimate escape, caught by the very system he tried to manipulate, but the justice that followed was a messy, human compromise. It was a resolution that left no one entirely satisfied, a reminder that in the wake of a truly heinous act, there is no such thing as a perfect ending. There is only the slow process of picking up the pieces, the diplomatic mending of fences, and the quiet, enduring memory of a woman who went to sea seeking a dream and found a nightmare. The Pacific remains as vast as ever, its tides continuing their rhythmic pull, forever indifferent to the small, violent dramas of the humans who dare to cross its surface, leaving us to find our own way toward a closure that remains as elusive as the shifting sea itself. The case ends not with a bang, but with a somber contemplation of the fragility of our protections. It forces us to look at the isolated corners of our world and ask who is watching over those who have no one to turn to. It challenges us to bridge the gaps between nations, not just for trade or politics, but for the fundamental principle that a human life has value, regardless of the coordinates where it is taken. As we close the file on the Sea Oak and the flight of Captain Fletcher, we are left with a haunting sense of the unfinished. The legal books may be closed, the sentences may be served, but the deep-seated questions about sovereignty, the safety of women in isolated environments, and the true meaning of international justice will continue to drift across the water, waiting for the next storm to bring them back to the shore. The story of the Sea Oak is a tragedy of the high seas, but it is also a very grounded lesson in the complexities of the human condition and the enduring, difficult quest to ensure that no one, no matter how far they sail, is ever truly beyond the reach of the light. The vastness of the South Pacific is not just a geographical reality, but a psychological state of being that exerts a profound influence on those who choose to live within its boundaries. When we look back at the harrowing journey of the Sea Oak and the tragic fate of Patricia Lynn Kearney, we are forced to confront the unsettling truth that the ocean remains one of the last true frontiers where the reach of modern civilization is often stretched to its breaking point. This final reflection is not merely an epilogue to a crime, but an exploration of the deeper, systemic cracks that allowed such a tragedy to occur and the enduring shadows it has cast over the maritime world. For the international community of sailors, the Dean J. Fletcher case serves as a permanent architectural shift in how they perceive their own safety and the accountability of those with whom they share the water. The dream of the open sea as a place of total autonomy has been replaced by a more sober understanding that absolute freedom can, in the wrong hands, become an instrument of absolute tyranny. The legacy of the Sea Oak is a haunting reminder that while we have mapped the ocean's floors and tracked its currents with satellite precision, we are still remarkably ill-equipped to police the human darkness that can manifest in its most remote corners. One of the most persistent echoes of this case is found in the way it transformed the cultural landscape of the Vavayu Island group in Tonga. Before 2016, the relationship between the local Tongan population and the visiting yachting community was characterized by a specific type of island hospitality known as whakaepapie, or deep respect. The islands were a sanctuary where doors were rarely locked and the arrival of a foreign vessel was seen as an opportunity for cultural exchange and mutual benefit. However, the brutality of Fletcher's crime and the audacity of his escape shattered this sense of communal trust. The image of Fletcher brandishing a flare gun at the Tongan police was not just a moment of personal defiance, it was a symbolic violation of the sanctuary that Tonga had provided. In the years following the case, there has been a subtle but noticeable hardening of the boundaries. The local authorities are now more vigilant, and the once casual interactions between locals and yachties carry a new layer of caution. The tragedy proved that a single individual's actions could poison the well of an entire region's goodwill, leaving the people of Tonga to grapple with the reality that their kindness could be exploited by someone fleeing the very laws they were trying to uphold. The case also initiated a profound and ongoing conversation within the global Live Aboard community regarding the hidden epidemic of domestic violence at sea. The isolation that sailors crave, the ability to be hundreds of miles from the nearest human being, is the exact same environment that provides an abuser with total control. In a traditional land-based setting, a victim of domestic abuse has at least the theoretical possibility of a neighbor hearing a struggle, a friend noticing a bruise at work, or the ability to walk out the front door and seek shelter. On a yacht like the Sea Oak, none of these safety nets exist. The hull of the boat becomes a fortress for the aggressor and a cage for the victim. The Fletcher case forced many in the sailing world to look more closely at the dynamics of the couples they meet in far-flung ports. It raised difficult questions about our collective responsibility to intervene when we sense that something is wrong behind the closed hatches of a neighboring vessel. The tragedy of Patricia Kearney is a call to action for a community that often prides itself on minding its own business, reminding every sailor that the privacy of a boat must never be allowed to supersede the fundamental right to human safety. From a legal standpoint, the saga of Dean J. Fletcher continues to be cited as a landmark example of the complexities of extraterritorial jurisdiction. It highlighted a terrifying, gray zone in international law where a criminal might believe they can navigate between different legal systems to find the one with the most favorable outcomes. Fletcher's flight to American Samoa was a calculated gamble on the friction between Tongan and American law, and in many ways, that gamble paid off. The fact that he was able to avoid a murder trial in the jurisdiction where the crime occurred is a point of legal contention that still frustrates prosecutors and victims' advocates. It suggests that if you are a citizen of a powerful nation, your nationality can act as a high-tech armor that protects you even after you have committed the most heinous of acts. This has led to calls for more robust and streamlined extradition treaties between the United States and smaller Pacific nations, ensuring that the death penalty obstacle is managed in a way that does not inadvertently grant leniency to those who deserve the full weight of justice. The psychological profile of Dean J. Fletcher himself remains a subject of morbid fascination for those who study the outlaw mentality. He was a man who clearly viewed himself as the master of his own universe, a captain who believed that the rules of the land no longer applied once he had cast off his lines. This sense of maritime exceptionalism is a dangerous trait when combined with a volatile temper and a lack of empathy. His ability to maintain a cold, technical focus on navigation while his wife lay dead below deck, and while he was being hunted by multiple nations, speaks to a level of sociopathic compartmentalization that is truly chilling. Fletcher was not a man who was broken by his crime. He was a man who was empowered by the challenge of the escape. By examining his actions, we gain insight into a specific type of maritime predator, one who uses the technical requirements of sailing as a way to distance themselves from the moral requirements of being human. The Sea Oak was his instrument, the Pacific was his theater, and Patricia was the tragic collateral damage in his pursuit of a life without consequences. In the quiet ports of Pago Pago, the story of the fugitive yacht has passed into local legend, a tale told to new Coast Guard recruits as a lesson in the unpredictability of the Pacific. American Samoa, as a territory caught between two worlds, was the perfect stage for the final act of this drama. The presence of federal agents in such a remote outpost is a reminder that the reach of the United States is vast, but the Fletcher case also showed how that reach can be slowed by the very bureaucracy meant to guide it. The weeks Fletcher spent in custody in Pago Pago, while the diplomats argued over his fate, were a period of suspended animation that perfectly illustrated the limbo of international law. For the officers who boarded the Sea Oak, the experience was a visceral encounter with the reality that the ocean can carry anything to your doorstep, from the beauty of global trade to the wreckage of a shattered marriage and a desperate man. As we look out over the Pacific today, it is easy to see only the beauty, the endless blue, the white crests of the waves, and the promise of a horizon that never ends. But for those who know the story of Dean J. Fletcher and Patricia Kearney, that horizon is now tinged with a different color. It is the color of a warning. The ocean is not a vacuum. It is a space where human behavior is amplified by the absence of traditional restraints. The tragedy of the Sea Oak taught us that we cannot rely on the sea to wash away our problems or to hide our crimes. It taught us that justice is a terrestrial concept that we must work tirelessly to carry with us into the blue, no matter how difficult the journey. The memory of Patricia Kearney must be the anchor that keeps us grounded in our commitment to protect the vulnerable, even when they are thousands of miles from home. The final reflection on this case must also acknowledge the resilience of the Kingdom of Tonga. Despite the embarrassment of the escape and the disappointment of the final sentencing, the Tongan authorities acted with a level of dedication that should not be forgotten. They pursued Fletcher with the limited resources they had, refusing to let the death of a visitor go unremarked. Their outrage was not just about a breach of security, it was about a breach of their cultural values. The people of Tonga understand, perhaps better than anyone, that the sea is a gift that must be treated with respect. Fletcher's crime was a violation of that gift, an insult to the waters that sustain the islands. By continuing to demand justice, even when the odds were stacked against them, Tonga proved that a nation's size has nothing to do with its moral stature. Ultimately, the story of the Sea Oak is a narrative about the limits of escape. Dean J. Fletcher tried to sail away from his past, his crime, and the laws of men. He used every ounce of his skill to put distance between himself and the consequences of his actions. But in the end, he found that there is no harbor in this world that can provide true sanctuary for a guilty conscience. He was caught not just by the United States Coast Guard, but by the unavoidable reality that we carry ourselves with us wherever we go. The freedom he sought was a hollow illusion, a ghost ship sailing toward a destination that didn't exist. As his sentence is served and he eventually fades from the public eye, the lesson remains: the ocean is vast, but it is not infinite, and the truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep it is buried. The Pacific remains a place of mystery and wonder, a realm that calls to the adventurous and the brave. It will continue to be a home for those who seek a life outside the ordinary. But let the story of the Sea Oak be a light on the reef, a signal to all who navigate these waters that the isolation of the sea is a responsibility, not an excuse. We owe it to Patricia Kearney to ensure that the silence of the ocean is never again used to drown out a cry for help. We owe it to the nations of the Pacific to respect their sovereignty and their laws. And we owe it to ourselves to remember that justice, like the sea itself, is a powerful and relentless force that eventually finds its way to every shore. The journey of the Sea Oak is over. The vessel is gone, and the wind has long since filled the sails of other ships, but the story remains, a dark, necessary constellation in the maritime sky, guiding us toward a future where no one is ever truly alone on the deep blue. The ultimate tragedy of the Dean J. Fletcher case is not found merely in the violent mechanics of a crime committed in the dark of a tropical night, nor is it contained within the dramatic nautical miles of a high-seas chase across the South Pacific. Instead, the true weight of this narrative resides in the profound silence that follows the conclusion of the legal proceedings, a silence that reflects the immense difficulty of achieving absolute justice in a world governed by fragmented jurisdictions and competing national interests. As we look back on the saga of the Sea Oak from the vantage point of the present, we are forced to recognize that the ocean remains a place where the human spirit is tested in ways that land-based society can scarcely comprehend. The Pacific Ocean, in its infinite and terrifying majesty, acted as the stage for a drama that exposed the absolute best and worst of our systems of order. It showed us the remarkable technical proficiency of a man determined to evade accountability, and it showed us the relentless, if occasionally clumsy, reach of two nations attempting to uphold the sanctity of human life. Yet, as the headlines have faded and the case has transitioned from a breaking news story into a chapter of maritime legal history, the lingering questions about sovereignty, safety, and the true cost of a life lost at sea continue to drift through the collective memory of the sailing community. The technological landscape of 2016 played a crucial role in both the execution of Fletcher's escape and the eventual success of his capture, highlighting a specific era of maritime transition. At that time, the systems for tracking small recreational vessels were far less integrated than they are today, providing a man of Fletcher's expertise with the digital shadows necessary to disappear. The Sea Oak was not a massive container ship required to broadcast constant, unalterable signals to global satellites. It was a private yacht, a speck of fiberglass in a sea of blue. When Fletcher slipped out of the Vavayu harbor, he was essentially stepping back in time to an era where a sailor could vanish simply by crossing the horizon. This technical gap is a central theme of the case, illustrating the tension between our modern desire for total surveillance and the ancient, lawless reality of the open water. The fact that he was eventually intercepted in Pago Pago was less a triumph of technology and more a victory for human vigilance and the traditional grapevine of the maritime world. It serves as a reminder that in the vastness of the Pacific, the most effective form of security is still the watchful eye of a fellow mariner and the shared understanding that a boat moving with such desperate purpose is often carrying a heavy burden of secrets. Furthermore, the institutional scar left on the Kingdom of Tonga cannot be overstated. For a nation that defines itself through its relationship with the sea and its deep-rooted traditions of hospitality, the Fletcher case was a traumatic violation of the national character. The escape of a high-profile prisoner from under the noses of local law enforcement was a blow to Tongan pride that resonated through every level of the government. It forced a painful introspection regarding the adequacy of their resources and the vulnerability of their remote outposts. In the years following 2016, the Tongan police force underwent a quiet but significant evolution, moving away from the more relaxed, communal policing style that Fletcher had so ruthlessly exploited. The tragedy proved that the kingdom could no longer afford to view international visitors through a lens of inherent trust. This shift, while necessary for security, represents a loss of innocence for the Vavayu Islands. The post-Fletcher era in Tonga is one of increased formality and guardedness, a legacy of a single man's crimes that has altered the way thousands of other innocent travelers are received in these waters. The legal standoff between the United States and Tonga regarding Fletcher's extradition remains a textbook study in the inherent friction between the First World and developing nations. The United States' refusal to return Fletcher to Tonga, based on the abstract possibility of the death penalty, created a diplomatic impasse that many in the Pacific viewed as an act of legal imperialism. It suggested that an American life, even one accused of the most brutal crime, was more valuable than the sovereign right of a smaller nation to judge those who violate its laws. This jurisdictional shield provided Fletcher with a level of protection he never could have earned on the merit of his actions. It transformed him from a common fugitive into a pawn in a larger geopolitical debate about human rights and judicial standards. The result, a plea deal for manslaughter in a Hawaiian courtroom, felt to many like a managed outcome rather than a true reckoning. It was a compromise born of bureaucratic necessity, a way for the United States to fulfill its legal obligations while avoiding the messy, unpredictable realities of an international murder trial. For the family of Patricia Kearney, this meant that the final judgment of the man who took her life was dictated more by the fine print of extradition treaties than by the raw truth of her suffering. The psychological trap of the live-aboard lifestyle is perhaps the most haunting sociological element of the Sea Oak story. We often talk about domestic violence in terms of closed doors and hidden bruises, but on a yacht in the middle of the South Pacific, the isolation is absolute. The case forced the global sailing community to confront the reality that the dream of sailing the world is often a nightmare for those trapped in abusive relationships. Patricia Kearney's story is a call to look past the beautiful sunsets and the white sails to the human dynamics contained within the hull. Her death was not an isolated incident, but the final, fatal peak of a mountain of control and intimidation that had been built over thousands of miles of travel. The sea did not create the violence, but it provided the perfect environment for it to reach its terminal conclusion. The legacy of this case is an ongoing effort within the cruising community to create better networks of support for those in distress, a recognition that the isolation of the sea must be balanced by a renewed commitment to looking out for one another. As for the Sea Oak itself, the vessel that was once a home and later a tomb, its fate is a metaphor for the entire tragedy. A boat that has seen such violence and such a desperate flight can never truly return to being a simple recreational craft. It is a physical vessel of trauma, a structure that holds the memory of every blow struck and every mile of the frantic escape. When such boats are finally dismantled or sold into obscurity, it is a necessary act of erasure, but the story they carried remains anchored in the minds of those who saw them in the harbors of Niuafu and Pago Pago. The physical disappearance of the Sea Oak mirrors the way the case has moved out of the public eye, leaving behind only the cold, dry transcripts of the court and the enduring grief of the survivors. The boat is gone, but the wake it left behind continues to disturb the calm waters of the Pacific legal landscape. In our final moments with this story, we must return to the memory of Patricia Lynn Kearney. In the vast majority of true crime narratives, the victim is often the first thing to be obscured by the technical details of the investigation and the personality of the perpetrator. But Patricia was the reason for every radio transmission, every nautical mile of the pursuit, and every legal motion filed in Honolulu. She was a woman who sought a life of profound meaning and adventure, only to have that life extinguished by the one person she should have been able to trust in the most dangerous environment on Earth. To remember Patricia is to remember that the sea is a place of immense beauty that demands an equal measure of moral responsibility. Her loss is a permanent shadow on the beauty of the Vavayu Islands, a reminder that the world is only as safe as the people we choose to share it with. Her journey ended in a tragedy that should never have happened, and our duty is to ensure that her story is not just a tale of crime and capture, but a testament to the need for a more compassionate and vigilant world. The Pacific Ocean continues to roll in long, rhythmic swells against the reefs of Tonga and the docks of American Samoa, as indifferent to the history of the sea oak as it is to the countless other dramas that have played out on its surface over the millennia. The tides come in and the tides go out, washing away the footprints on the sand and the salt from the decks of the boats. But the story of Dean J. Fletcher remains a permanent part of the lore of the South Pacific, a cautionary tale about the limits of law and the depths of human desperation. It is a story that ends not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, somber understanding of the complexities of our existence. We have built a world of borders and laws, of treaties and courts, but the ocean reminds us that there are still places where the individual must answer to something far more ancient and unforgiving. The flight of the sea oak is a journey that has reached its final port, leaving us to reflect on the nature of justice, the value of sovereignty, and the enduring silence of the great blue void. As the sun sets over the horizon of the South Pacific, the light turns a deep, bruised purple, reflecting the colors of the ocean that both hid and revealed the crimes of Dean J. Fletcher. The podcast ends here, but the questions it raised will continue to echo every time a yacht casts off its lines and heads for the open sea. We are left with the realization that justice is not something that is found on the horizon. It is something we must build and defend every single day, on land and at sea. The case of the sea oak is a reminder that even in the most beautiful places on Earth, the darkness can find a way in, and our only defense is the light of the truth and the unwavering memory of those we have lost. The Pacific is wide, and its secrets are many, but for a brief moment in 2016, the world looked into its depths and saw the reflection of a tragedy that we must never forget. Good night, and may your own horizons always be clear of the storms that claimed the life of Patricia Kearney and the soul of the sea oak. The profound silence that eventually settled over the case of Dean J. Fletcher was not the silence of peace, but rather the heavy, lingering stillness of a question left partially unanswered. As we survey the vast, blue landscape of the South Pacific years after the sea oak was captured in the industrial shadows of Pago Pago, we are left to contemplate the terrifying intersection of human violence and geographical isolation. This narrative, which began in the sun-drenched anchorages of Tonga and ended in the sterile, windowless courtrooms of Hawaii, serves as a definitive case study in the limitations of modern justice when confronted with the ancient, lawless reality of the high seas. To truly understand the weight of the story, we must look beyond the dramatic headlines of the jailbreak and the maritime pursuit to examine the deeper, more subtle consequences that continue to ripple through the lives of everyone touched by this tragedy. The Pacific Ocean, for all its majesty, acted as a silent accomplice in the isolation of Patricia Lynn Kearney, providing the very veil of distance that Dean J. Fletcher believed would shield him from the eyes of the law. His calculation was that the ocean was too big for the truth to find its way home, but he underestimated the relentless persistence of a globalized legal system and the enduring memory of the woman he thought he could simply sail away from. The legacy of the sea oak is most visibly etched into the administrative memory of the Kingdom of Tonga, a nation that found itself at the center of an international firestorm through no fault of its own. For the local Tongan authorities, the case of Dean J. Fletcher was a traumatic awakening to the vulnerabilities of their own sovereign systems. Before 2016, the idea of an American captain engaging in such a brutal act of domestic violence and then orchestrating a tactical escape from a local jail was almost unthinkable in the peaceful context of the Vavayu Islands. The escape was not just a failure of locks and bars, but a failure of the cultural assumption that those who come to the islands as guests will respect the laws of their hosts. The internal investigations that followed the jailbreak were grueling and necessitated a fundamental shift in how Tonga manages foreign detainees. The days of a relaxed, informal detention process were permanently replaced by a more rigid and suspicious security protocol. This shift represents a permanent loss of a certain type of innocence for the Tongan police force, a hardening that was born from the betrayal of a man who used his perceived social status to manipulate his captors. The people of Tonga were left to reconcile their tradition of hospitality with the harsh reality that some who seek refuge in their waters are running from a darkness that no tropical sun can illuminate. Furthermore, the diplomatic standoff between the United States and Tonga regarding Fletcher's extradition remains one of the most significant and debated aspects of the case's aftermath. When the United States Department of Justice successfully blocked the return of Fletcher to Tonga, it created a rift in the principle of international legal reciprocity that has not entirely healed. From the Tongan perspective, the message was clear. American sovereignty extends even over the crimes committed by its citizens on foreign soil, especially when those crimes occur in nations that do not mirror the specific legal structures of the West. The death penalty defense, while legally sound within the framework of U.S. human rights policy, felt to many in the Pacific like a convenient loophole that allowed a murderer to escape the specific judgment of the community he had harmed. This case is now frequently cited in academic discussions about the death penalty obstacle in international law, illustrating how a country's refusal to abolish capital punishment can inadvertently create a safe haven for its fugitives in nations like the United States. The result was a lopsided justice, where the perpetrator's rights were protected by his superpower nationality, while the victim's right to see her killer face the laws of the land where she died was effectively sidelined. The psychological profile of Dean J. Fletcher as a mariner fugitive provides a chilling look into the mind of someone who believes they can outrun their own morality. Throughout the pursuit and the subsequent legal proceedings, Fletcher never appeared as a man broken by the weight of his actions. Instead, he presented as a tactician, someone for whom the death of his wife was a logistical hurdle to be navigated around with the same cold precision as a coral reef. His ability to pilot the Sea Oak single-handedly for over 300 nautical miles across open water while being hunted is a testament to his skill as a sailor, but it is also a testament to his profound lack of remorse. For Fletcher, the ocean was not a place of reflection, but a tactical theater. He viewed the vastness of the Pacific as a weapon he could use against his pursuers, a belief that nearly proved true. This specific type of maritime arrogance, the idea that the captain of a vessel is a sovereign entity beyond the reach of land-based morality, is a theme that recurs in some of the most disturbing cases of crime at sea. Fletcher was the ultimate manifestation of this belief, a man who thought the horizon could wash away his sins if only he could sail fast enough to reach it. For the international cruising community, the story of the Sea Oak remains a somber cautionary tale about the reality of domestic violence in isolated settings. The live-aboard lifestyle is often romanticized as the ultimate escape from the pressures of society, but the Fletcher case exposed the terrifying isolation that comes with that escape. In a neighborhood on land, a woman in Patricia Kearney's position might have had a chance to flee to a neighbor's house or to call for help that would arrive in minutes. On the Sea Oak, her world was reduced to a few dozen square feet of fiberglass surrounded by thousands of miles of water. The cruising community has had to confront the reality that they are often the only ones in a position to see the signs of trouble in their fellow sailors' relationships. The case has led to an increased awareness and a more proactive approach to domestic safety within yachting circles, as people realize that the privacy of a neighboring boat should never be a shield for violence. The memory of Patricia Kearney serves as a silent vigil for all those who are currently navigating the world's oceans in a state of fear, reminding the community that their vigilance is the only safety net that exists in the remote corners of the planet. The final resolution of the case, the manslaughter plea in a Honolulu courtroom, continues to be a source of deep frustration for those who believe in absolute accountability. While the plea deal ensured that Fletcher would serve time in a federal prison, it also meant that the full details of the murder of Patricia Kearney would never be aired in a public trial. The truth was essentially bartered for a guaranteed conviction, a pragmatic legal move that left the moral questions of the case hanging in the air. For Patricia's family, The sentence could never be long enough to compensate for the loss of a daughter and a sister, and the manslaughter label felt like a diminishing of the brutality she had endured. The legal system, in its effort to be efficient and certain, often fails to provide the emotional closure that victims' families so desperately need. The Fletcher case is a stark example of this failure, a reminder that the law is often a blunt instrument when a scalpel is required to cut to the core of a human tragedy. As the years pass, the physical artifacts of the case are slowly being reclaimed by the elements or the machinery of the state. The Sea Oak, once a vessel of adventure and later a crime scene, has likely been dismantled or sold, its name scrubbed from the maritime registers. But the story it carried is not so easily erased. It remains a permanent part of the nautical lore of the Pacific, a warning to all who dare to cross the deep blue that the law of the sea is not the only law that matters. The chase from Vavayu to Pago Pago was a dramatic moment in time, but the slow, agonizing journey toward a partial justice is the true heart of the narrative. It is a story that teaches us about the fragility of our protections and the enduring strength of our pursuit of the truth. We are reminded that even in the most remote parts of our world, we are connected by a shared responsibility to one another, a responsibility that does not end at the territorial limit of our nations. Ultimately, the case of Dean J. Fletcher and the fate of Patricia Lynn Kearney leave us with a profound sense of the unfinished. The tides of the Pacific continue to wash against the shores of Tonga and American Samoa, indifferent to the history that was made in their waters. But for us, the listeners and the observers, the story remains a dark constellation in the sky of true crime. It forces us to look at the shadows on the water and ask who is watching over the vulnerable in the world's most isolated places. It reminds us that justice is a journey that requires constant navigation and that the truth, like the ocean, is a force that cannot be contained forever. The flight of the Sea Oak has reached its final destination, and the captain has been brought to shore, but the memory of the woman he lost and the life he took will continue to haunt the Pacific as long as there are sailors to tell the tale. We leave this story here, in the quiet of the harbor, with the hope that the lessons learned from the Sea Oak will serve as a lighthouse for future travelers, guiding them toward a safer and more just world, where no one is ever truly beyond the reach of the light. Good night, and may we all find the courage to be the witnesses that the world's most isolated places so desperately need. The deep, rolling swells of the South Pacific have a way of absorbing history, smoothing over the disruptions caused by human conflict until the surface appears as pristine and undisturbed as it was at the dawn of time. Yet, beneath that deceptive tranquility, the legacy of the Sea Oak and the tragic fate of Patricia Lynn Kearney remain firmly anchored in the consciousness of those who understand the true cost of maritime isolation. As we arrive at this final, overarching contemplation of the entire saga, we are forced to look beyond the immediate boundaries of the legal case and examine the broader existential questions that the flight of Dean J. Fletcher has left in its wake. This is no longer just a story about a crime, a jailbreak, or a jurisdictional dispute. It is a profound reflection on the nature of human accountability when stripped of the stabilizing structures of mainland society. The journey of the Sea Oak was an attempt to use the vastness of the planet as a shield against the moral consequences of a brutal act, a gamble that the sheer scale of the ocean could swallow a scream and hide a killer. But the resolution of this case, however complex and imperfect, proved that the world has grown smaller and that the invisible lines of justice can eventually stretch across the deepest waters to hold a predator to account. The enduring impact of this tragedy is perhaps most deeply felt in the shifting psychology of the international cruising community itself. For decades, the subculture of global sailors has operated on a foundational myth of total self-reliance and geographic escapism, a belief that by casting off the lines, one can leave the pathologies and dangers of urban life behind. The murder of Patricia Kearney by her own husband, the very captain who was sworn to navigate her safely through the perils of the sea, shattered this illusion with catastrophic force. It forced a community that traditionally prides itself on extreme privacy and non-interference to confront the reality that isolation can be weaponized. The maritime world has had to undergo a slow, painful process of introspection, recognizing that the silence of a remote anchorage can be a terrifying prison for someone facing domestic terror. The legacy of the Sea Oak has inspired a new wave of advocacy and awareness among liveaboard cruisers, with organizations and informal networks working to create safer channels for individuals to signal for help without alerting their abusers. The case demonstrated that the traditional hands-off etiquette of the sea must have limits, and that the safety of a fellow human being must always take precedence over the desire to stay out of other people's business. On the diplomatic front, the ripples of the confrontation between the United States and the Kingdom of Tonga continue to influence regional relations in the South Pacific. The case highlighted a systemic friction that exists when a global superpower interacts with a smaller, developing nation over matters of criminal justice and sovereignty. The refusal of the United States to extradite Fletcher, despite the clear evidence of his crime and his humiliating escape from Tongan custody, left a lingering sense of resentment in Nuku'alofa that is not entirely dissipated. It exposed the stark reality of geopolitical asymmetry, showing that nationality can serve as a powerful armor that insulates an individual from the laws of the land they have violated. This legal standoff has become a benchmark study for international diplomats and legal scholars, illustrating the profound challenges of managing extradition treaties when capital punishment is an abstract possibility. The compromise that followed, the manslaughter plea in Hawaii, stands as a monument to diplomatic pragmatism rather than absolute moral clarity, a reminder that in the arena of international law, the pursuit of a flawless justice is often sacrificed for the certainty of a managed outcome. The psychological footprint left by Dean J. Fletcher throughout this entire ordeal remains an unsettling study in the anatomy of a narcissistic flight. Fletcher was a man who clearly viewed his mastery of the sea not just as a professional skill, but as a mandate for personal sovereignty. His behavior from the moment of the assault to his final capture in Pago Pago revealed a complete absence of the emotional wreckage that typically accompanies a crime of passion. He did not collapse in grief, nor did he surrender to the authorities in a state of panic. Instead, he treated the death of his wife as a technical challenge to be solved through navigation and deception. His ability to outwit his guards, return to the crime scene, and single-handedly sail a complex vessel across hundreds of miles of open ocean while being actively hunted requires a level of compartmentalization that borders on the sociopathic. Fletcher viewed the Pacific not as a grand natural wonder, but as a tactical maze where he could exploit the blind spots of modern law enforcement. His capture did not break this worldview. Rather, his subsequent manipulation of the American legal system showed that he remained a strategist until the very end, utilizing every procedural shield available to minimize the consequences of his actions. To honor the memory of Patricia Lynn Kearney, it is necessary to rescue her narrative from the massive shadow cast by her husband's sensational escape and the ensuing legal drama. In many accounts of the case, Patricia is treated as a static element, the catalyst for a high-seas chase rather than a living, breathing human being whose life was violently stolen. She was a woman of immense courage and curiosity, someone who had looked at the vastness of the world and chosen a life of extraordinary adventure. The ultimate horror of her death is that her love for the sea and her trust in her companion were the very instruments used to trap her in a situation of absolute vulnerability. Her story must remain at the center of the Sea Oak legacy, serving as a reminder of the thousands of women who face violence in hidden, isolated spaces where the traditional avenues of rescue do not exist. To remember Patricia is to commit to a world where no one is allowed to disappear into the dark, and where the light of accountability is carried into the most remote corners of the earth, ensuring that a life lost at sea is valued with the same intensity as a life lost on land. The physical destiny of the Sea Oak itself provides a final, haunting metaphor for the entire case. A vessel that has been the site of a brutal murder and the vehicle for a desperate international flight can never truly wash away its history. Long after the forensic teams had finished documenting the blood spatter and the digital navigation logs, the boat remained a physical manifestation of trauma, a ghost ship tied to an industrial dock in American Samoa. Whether it was eventually stripped for parts, renamed to hide its grim past, or allowed to slowly rot in some forgotten corner of a shipyard, the vessel could never return to its original purpose as a home and a sanctuary. Its fate mirrors the way the case has settled into the archives of true crime, a structural ruin that investigators and historians look at to understand how a dream of freedom can warp into a nightmare of violence and flight. The boat may have vanished from the active shipping registers, but its wake continues to disturb the calm waters of the Pacific legal landscape, a permanent warning written in the water. As the years pass and the events of 2016 recede further into the past, the story of Dean J. Fletcher serves as a stark reminder of the limits of escape. Fletcher believed that by crossing the invisible lines that mark the territorial waters of a nation, he could leave his guilt behind and enter a realm where the laws of men no longer applied. He trusted in the vastness of the blue void to swallow his crime and provide him with a permanent anonymity. But his failure proved that the world has developed a memory that the ocean cannot wash away. He was caught not just by the physical interceptors of the United States Coast Guard, but by the interconnectedness of a global society that refuses to allow a murderer to simply sail into the sunset. The justice that followed was messy, compromised, and deeply frustrating to those who demanded an absolute reckoning, but it was a definitive statement that the high seas are not a sanctuary for predators. The Pacific Ocean remains as vast and indifferent as ever, its deep blue currents continuing their ancient, rhythmic cycles around the islands of Tonga and the ports of American Samoa. The wind still fills the sails of hundreds of yachts navigating these exact same waters, their crews looking out at the horizon with the same sense of wonder that Patricia Kearney once felt. The sea keeps no record of the tragedies that occur on its surface. It does not mourn the lost or judge the wicked. It simply remains an infinite and beautiful wilderness that challenges the human spirit to its absolute core. But for those who know the history of the Sea Oak, the blue of the South Pacific will always carry a subtle shadow, a reminder of the night when the sanctuary of a boat became a chamber of horrors and a captain became a fugitive. The story ends here, not with the triumph of a perfect justice, but with a somber commitment to vigilance, an understanding that our laws and our humanity must travel with us into the deep, and a lasting prayer that the silence of the open ocean will never again be used to conceal the cry of the defenseless. Good night, and may the horizons you seek always be guided by the light of truth and the enduring memory of those who were lost along the way. The infinite horizon of the South Pacific represents one of the most profound paradoxes of the human experience, serving simultaneously as a canvas for the grandest dreams of liberty and a dark shroud for the most terrifying acts of domestic tyranny. As we bring our final, comprehensive analysis of the Sea Oak tragedy to its true and absolute conclusion, we are called to look beyond the historical milestones of the investigation, the geopolitical standoffs, and the final courtroom mechanics to examine the deep, indelible marks this case has left upon the very fabric of maritime culture. The flight of Dean J. Fletcher was not merely a desperate criminal escape. It was a philosophical assault on the ancient, unwritten laws of the sea, the sacred code that dictates that a vessel must always be a sanctuary for its crew and that a captain's ultimate, unshakable duty is the preservation of life. By turning his yacht into a crime scene and then using his maritime expertise as a weapon to evade justice, Fletcher violated a covenant that is as old as seafaring itself. The resolution of his case, though achieved through the pragmatic compromises of land-based legal systems, leaves behind a haunting reminder that while humanity has successfully colonized the globe with borders, treaties, and digital surveillance, the open ocean remains an untamed wilderness where the true measure of justice is ultimately determined by the moral integrity of those who dare to navigate its depths. The long-term sociological impact of this case within the global liveaboard community has manifested as a quiet but permanent paradigm shift, fundamentally altering how international cruisers interact with one another in remote ports of call. For generations, the cruising lifestyle was romanticized as a utopian community of like-minded individualists, where a shared love for the sea created an immediate, unspoken bond of trust between strangers. If a boat dropped anchor in a lonely bay in Tonga or Fiji, the neighboring vessels would look upon it with a sense of protective camaraderie, ready to offer mechanical assistance, trade provisions, or share stories of the open water. However, the revelation of the severe abuse and subsequent murder that took place aboard the Sea Oak forced this transient community to confront a darker, more complex reality. It became glaringly obvious that the very isolation these sailors sought to escape the pressures of modern society could easily be weaponized by an abusive partner to enforce a state of absolute captivity. In the years following 2016, the culture of non-interference that once defined the yachting world has been replaced by a more vigilant and compassionate awareness. Today, experienced cruisers are much more attuned to the subtle signs of domestic distress behind closed hatches, recognizing that a captain's demand for absolute privacy must never be allowed to silence a partner's desperate, unspoken cry for survival. On the geopolitical stage of the South Pacific, the diplomatic friction generated by the Fletcher case continues to serve as a vital case study for legal scholars examining the delicate balance of international sovereignty and extraterritorial justice. The absolute refusal of the United States to extradite an American citizen back to the Kingdom of Tonga, the very nation where the crime was committed and whose custody he had humiliated, exposed the deep, systemic fractures that occur when the legal frameworks of a global superpower collide with those of a developing island nation. For the people and government of Tonga, the outcome of the case was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark demonstration that the invisible shield of American nationality can effectively insulate a criminal from the full authority of foreign laws. This diplomatic standoff has forced a serious re-examination of how regional security and legal cooperation are managed in the Pacific, prompting calls for more sophisticated, nuanced treaties that address the specific challenges of capital punishment clauses without inadvertently granting a mandate of leniency to high-status fugitives. The legacy of the case is a renewed understanding that true international justice cannot be a one-way street dictated solely by the political leverage of larger nations, but must be built on a foundation of mutual respect for the sovereignty and dignity of every territory, no matter how small or remote it may be. The chilling psychological profile of Dean J. Fletcher, throughout his multi-day, single-handed towthot across 300 nautical miles of open ocean remains an unsettling testament to the heights of human compartmentalization and narcissistic survivalism. When we analyze his actions during that grueling voyage from Vavayu to Pago Pago, we do not see a man consumed by the devastating realization that he had taken the life of his wife, Patricia Lynn Kearney. Instead, we see a technician at work, an individual who looked at a catastrophic human tragedy through the cold, calculating lens of a logistical problem to be solved. He managed the complex rigging of the Sea Oak, monitored the weather patterns of the Pacific, and navigated through treacherous reef systems with the exact same detached precision he would have used during a routine holiday cruise. This complete absence of moral crisis or emotional collapse is what makes Fletcher such a terrifying figure in the annals of maritime crime. He viewed the ocean not as a space for self-reflection or repentance, but as a vast, lawless labyrinth where his superior sailing skills would allow him to outmaneuver the collective forces of international law enforcement. His capture did not invalidate this cold logic. It merely proved that even the most expert sailor cannot outrun a world that is becoming increasingly interconnected and intolerant of those who use the sea to hide their monstrosities. To ensure that the true meaning of this narrative is never lost to the passage of time, we must continuously elevate the memory of Patricia Lynn Kearney above the sensationalism of the jailbreak, the naval pursuit, and the complex legal maneuverings in Honolulu. Patricia was not a passive footnote in a high-seas thriller. She was an adventurous, courageous woman who possessed the rare spirit required to leave behind the safety of the mainland and embrace the unpredictable beauty of a life on the water. The ultimate tragedy of her existence is that her passion for exploration and her profound trust in her marital partner were the very vulnerabilities exploited to trap her in a situation of total helplessness. Her death aboard the Sea Oak must remain a solemn beacon for the international community, a permanent reminder that domestic violence knows no geographic boundaries and can manifest just as brutally in a tropical paradise as it can in a suburban home. Remembering Patricia means committing ourselves to a higher standard of global vigilance, ensuring that the isolated spaces of our planet are never again treated as lawless vacuums where the vulnerable can be silenced without consequence, and reinforcing the principle that every human life demands an absolute and unwavering pursuit of accountability, regardless of the coordinates where it is violently extinguished. The physical end of the sea oak itself provides the final, silent exclamation point to this haunting saga, serving as a monument to a dream that dissolved into a nightmare of blood and flight. Long after the federal prosecutors had secured their manslaughter plea and the media had moved on to other sensations, the yacht remained tied to a quiet dock, a heavy, material reminder of a broken covenant. A vessel that has witnessed such extreme violence can never truly be cleansed of its history. It becomes an object of trauma, a structure whose very wood and fiberglass are saturated with the memories of a struggle and a desperate run for freedom. Whether the boat was eventually scuttled in the deep waters of American Samoa, stripped down to its bare frame, or renamed by a new owner oblivious to its dark past, its true identity remains forever fixed in the historical records of the South Pacific. The sea oak stands as a powerful metaphor for the limits of geographic escapism, a stark reminder that we can sail to the furthest edges of the earth, but we can never leave the reality of who we are behind on the shore. As the years continue to pass and the events of 2016 settle permanently into the archives of maritime history, the story of Dean J. Fletcher remains an essential, cautionary tale for all who look to the ocean as a place of absolute escape. It is a narrative that challenges our romantic notions of the sea, forcing us to look past the beautiful sunsets and the white sails to recognize the immense moral responsibility that comes with true isolation. Fletcher's failure to achieve permanent freedom proved that the vastness of the Pacific is no longer large enough to hide a crime from the collective conscience of humanity. He was brought to justice not merely by the physical intervention of the United States Coast Guard, but by an invisible, global network of law and memory that refuses to let a life be stolen in silence. The partial justice achieved in that Hawaiian courtroom may have been a compromise of pragmatism, but it stood as a definitive declaration that no captain is sovereign over the life of another and that the laws of humanity travel with us across every wave. The deep blue waters of the South Pacific continue to roll in their ancient, majestic rhythms, washing against the coral reefs of Tonga and the industrial docks of Pago Pago with an indifference that is both beautiful and terrifying. The sea keeps no diaries and bears no scars from the tragedies that play out upon its surface. It simply endures, an infinite wilderness that reflects back whatever darkness or light we bring to it. But for those who remember the flight of the sea oak, the horizon will always hold a quiet, somber lesson. It is a story that ends not with a celebration of victory, but with a deep, reflective commitment to watchfulness, and understanding that the freedom of the sea must always be anchored by an equal commitment to the preservation of human dignity. As the sails of new ships catch the wind and head out into the deep blue, the memory of Patricia Kearney remains as a permanent lighthouse on the reef of our collective conscience, guiding us toward a future where no traveler is ever truly alone and where the truth will always find a way to rise to the surface, no matter how deep the waters or how vast the ocean.